Adam Stokes, welcome back onto the channel where we're joined by mathematician, co-founder of Ethereum and founder of Cardano, Charles Hoskinson. An absolute honor to have you on the channel. Thanks for joining us.
Adam, thank you so much for having me on. Absolute pleasure.
Charles, so much to discuss, but before we get into it, the most important question from the crypto community, are you Satoshi?
No. First off, you'd have to think, like, I would have been 20 years old. I'm a bright guy, but I'm by no means capable at 20 of conceiving a massive decentralized ecosystem, inventing new protocols, especially since I didn't study computer science professionally. I studied mathematics, and they're a world apart. Mathematicians like pen and paper. They don't like code. Most likely candidate for Satoshi is probably Adam Back. And I'd argue that if you really are curious to find Satoshi, you can actually make a lot of progress with something called code stellometry. So stellometry is a term for analyzing writing. And usually you do it for handwriting, but you can actually do it for code. And it turns out that programming code, the actual computer code that you write, is much like a fingerprint. It's very unique to the individual. It has very little to do with other stuff. So if you're really curious about who Satoshi is, you probably could take all of the original Bitcoin source code, run it through a stylometric analysis, and compare it to a training set of all the open source projects around that time period and 5-10 years before. And I guarantee you'll probably narrow that set of candidates down to a very small set. I'd say 5 or 10 people that are likely. And then there's also some facts and circumstances about the protocol itself, like the use of Forth as the scripting language for Bitcoin script. That was a very common pedagogical language in the 1980s and 1990s in the UK education system for undergraduates, as an example of a programming language. So you'd say, okay, the person is probably at the time of the creation of Bitcoin in their 40s or 50s. They probably come from the cypherpunk movement. They probably were educated in a UK style system, so that could be Australia or England, these types of things. And thank you. And then you can look at your set of candidates, and I say the most likely of that set would be Adam Back.
Well, I know that a lot of people do actually want to know who it is, but in the same spirit, I guess many people don't want to intrude on the anonymity of that. Like, there's a reason why he kept it to himself or didn't want to go public. So in many instances, I asked the question as a joke, but we do wonder, but we can sort of see after the global financial crisis of 2008, Bitcoin brought the concept of a distributed ledger. Then we had Ethereum, which you worked on, which brought the concept of smart contracts. Moving on to Cardano, how does that build upon the previous generation to move this space forward?
Yeah, so every generation you kind of learn something. And so for a long time, people were chasing decentralized money, and we were all looking for that smart cow that would open the gate and let us all out. And Bitcoin happened to be it, but there were a lot of preliminaries. I mean, Bitcoin started in the 1980s, and there were a lot of cypherpunk ideas there. And then in the 90s, there was DigiCash and a lot of great pioneering work from Hal Finney and David Chaum. And then in the early 2000s, you had work from, people like Nick Szabo and so forth. And there was kind of like this BitGold concept that was floating around. So the synthesis of all those concepts into Bitcoin was just a miracle of inspiration and a very simple system. And for its time, it solved a great problem. How do you create decentralized value and move that around like emails? The problem is the minute that you validate a concept, just like the minute you create the web browser, people complain about it being blind, deaf, and dumb. And they say, oh, God, we want more functionality. So the minute you have the browser, you're searching for JavaScript. You're searching for some language that will enable you to have richer experiences. And then once you do that, you go from static websites to Amazon and Facebook and YouTube, right? So similarly, the minute that you have Bitcoin, you need smart contracts. You need Ethereum. So we created Ethereum. And then the minute you have Ethereum, people say, wow, this is a great idea. We want to do this at scale. We want to do this with billions of people instead of thousands of people. And a replicated system can't do that. So you need new protocols for that. And then you say, wait a minute, the system has to talk to everything. Could you imagine how terrible Wi-Fi would be if it was connected to the manufacturer? So your Samsung phone could only talk to a Samsung router, or your Apple phone could only talk to an Apple router. It would be untenable. The whole reason Wi-Fi works is because it works for everybody regardless of your device. There's some agnosticism. Well, analogously, like your value, your identity, you'd like information to flow between the 8,000 plus cryptocurrencies and the thousands of legacy systems. And then finally, how do you govern a system with millions of people and no centralized company? We don't do that very well as humans. We like to think we can, but usually for Windows, you have a Microsoft. For Android, you have a Google. For iPhone, you have an Apple. Well, what happens when you remove the Apple? When you remove the Google, remove the Microsoft, how do you make decisions and move forward and stay competitive? Bitcoin is a miracle. It's also a failure. It's a miracle in that it introduced this great concept. It's a failure in that it can't evolve. So it knows it needs smart contracts. That system knows that it would get better to bring in a more sophisticated crypto and enhance a lot of things to make it more competitive with all these emerging standards, but there's no way to create enough consensus to be able to evolve the system. And then all of these different camps fight each other. So there's a lack of sustainability and governance there. Furthermore, there's a funding problem. There's a tragedy of the commons problem where we all agree it's necessary infrastructure, but there's no provisions made to subsidize the development. So what ends up happening is you have patrons that show up and they exert enormous influence over the evolution control of the system. For example, the block streams and the DCI and these other bodies and groups, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit. And we see already that's happening in the web, where Google has enormous influence over web standards because it's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And then suddenly the W3C is talking about injecting ads into your browser and other things as a standard. It's like, whoa, where did this come from? Well, Google kind of wanted it. So these are the three problems that we kind of said we need to solve as a consequence of the success of Ethereum and Bitcoin. And the problem is the problems grow up in exponential complexity. As there's a combinatorial explosion of things that can go wrong. Satoshi didn't create Bitcoin as a simple system because he couldn't come up with a more sophisticated system. He created Bitcoin as a simple system because the more complexity you introduce, the more that can go wrong. For example, the minute you create a rich smart contract language, you have a DAO hack, you have a parity hack, you have ring of Gauges style situations where you have malfeasant smart contracts that cause all kinds of chicanery and havoc. And the minute that your system grows to many, many users, you have the problems of scale. And then you have to start introducing all of these really complex layer 2 protocols or off-chain infrastructure to hold up the system and pretend like it's the centralized one. In reality, it's not. So that's the big challenge for us, is Cardano is a significantly more advanced product and protocol than Ethereum. And Ethereum is significantly more advanced than Bitcoin. And it's dealing with this complexity at times has just been bewildering.
One of the arguments I have on my channel with Cardano versus Ethereum is the advantage of Cardano, and I seek your opinion on this. So the advantage of Cardano versus Ethereum is that Ethereum has launched quickly, they've created a product, and now it's almost like they're trying to clean up all the issues that they have that Cardano is addressing before they're launching. It's almost like the analogy that I give on my channel is that Cardano is coming in, making sure that the foundation is completely rock solid, all the plumbing's in place, all the electrical lines are in, all the clearances are in before they actually build the house. Where in contrast, Ethereum sort of built the house before trying to get all those foundations in place, and now they've got a bigger challenge with trying to clear that up. Is that a fair analogy? And if not, why is Cardano going to be, in your opinion, so much more successful than Ethereum?
So one of the things about wisdom is that you tend to invent the safety belt after you invent the car. And you don't just proactively say, hey, it's a good idea to put a safety belt in. What happens is you get in a car accident, you go through the windshield, and you're like, boy, we should do something about that. So Ethereum and Bitcoin were much smaller systems in a much smaller economy when they came out. So there was no value at risk. We raised $18 million for Ethereum. We were like, wow, if we can get to $100 million cryptocurrency and get, a few thousand people building cool stuff, it's successful, huzzah. And now it's a $130 billion ecosystem. So there's a fundamental difference between where it began to where it's at. And similarly, when you build the car or the first airplane, you're not thinking at all about safety. You're not thinking at all about these success factors that come, the consequences of success that come. Well, if you build a car today, you don't have the ability to just pretend like history doesn't exist. So you have to do things differently. So the Teslas, for example, they had to adhere to all the safety standards that Ford and GM and these other things while also innovating and bringing new things to market. So we recognized very early on that there were a lot of issues with consensus design, especially if you plan on scaling with proof of work in the way that Bitcoin and Ethereum were using it. So we needed a fundamentally different way of doing consensus, and even Vitalik agrees with that, which is why F2 exists, and they're trying to clean this stuff up. But we went beyond that and said the entire development paradigm of how people build dApps, they write smart contracts, this type of stuff, it has to be rethought from a very first principles basis, because it was never built in a way for sustainability. It was never built in a way for resource predictability, because if I'm an application builder, I'd like to have predictable application costs. Could you imagine a web host who's like, well, maybe I'll charge you $500 today for your app, and then tomorrow maybe it'll be $5,000, and then the next day it'll be $5 here. It's like, what kind of drugs are you on? This is not a business. I need to have predictable cost if I'm going to be able to have a predictable application, or else nothing works. Well, Ethereum was never built for that. It was built as an experiment that kind of grew into a successful project, and now they're trying to build a safer car. And this is why first mover advantage in technology in many cases is actually a historic disadvantage. The first web browser was Mosaic, and it was for its time revolutionary, but really didn't do much in the long stream of things. Even Netscape failed, and even Internet Explorer failed, and now we're in the Chrome age, and maybe Brave will dethrone them. Who knows? Well, similarly, search engines. Like Google, I think, was the 17th search engine to be commercialized. So there was a lot of failures before Google. There was a monopoly before Google. Yahoo had a huge chunk of the market, and they were very powerful. MySpace had a huge chunk of the market before Facebook came. And now Facebook is starting to deal with all these emergent hellions that are new social networks that are scraping away at it. So usually what happens when you're the first mover is you get a lot of population, but it's unstable, and they're very frustrated with that platform. And you're covered with lots of scars and legacy design decisions and other such things. And as a consequence, you can't, it's like holding sand in your hand. It slips through your fingers, and it's really, really hard to keep your lead. And then all these other competitors come, and they have the benefit of hindsight, so they don't make the same mistakes you've made. And they also know where they need to innovate. And because they don't have to deal with the legacy concerns you have, they can move faster than you. And as a consequence, they get more features and come to market before. So for example, Ethereum had been working on proof of stake a year longer than we had with Casper. Despite that, we were first to market with our proof of stake protocol, and they probably won't have theirs fully turned on until 2022. And that's just completely a consequence of process and scale in dealing with their legacy concerns.
I'm wondering if you're comfortable speaking to us about it. Do you still speak to Vitalik, and why did you leave? Why did you two break up, per se?
Well, I don't imagine Vitalik has a super high opinion of me, and it is what it is. The reality is that we have very big philosophical disagreements about how things ought to be run. When I was there, I said, look, if we're taking other people's money, we have to put that money into a structure that creates accountability. Furthermore, we have to put golden handcuffs on the founders and keep them loyal to the project, because there's too many of them. There's 8 founders. And if they're not locked into something, then what's going to happen is they're all going to run away and create their own ventures, which is what they did. Anthony did Decentral, Gavin did Polkadot and Parity. I did Cardano. There's all 7 of the 8 are gone. And furthermore, the incentives were set up that we got paid up front with a founder reward, which I didn't take, the other 7 did. Basically, if the project's successful, hallelujah. If it fails, hallelujah. But you've already got your maximum reward up front, whereas in an equity finance model, you have to build value over time, and you have a venture capital arm keeping you accountable. So there was a fundamental disagreement about business strategy and execution vision, and I felt a for-profit model with VC money to build the protocol made a lot more sense. And then when the protocol was done, spin it out and have a governing foundation run it would be probably a much better approach. That's one dimension. The other dimension is your interpersonal reasons. We had for 6 months been living like hippies, in the Switzerland house, and he was traveling around the world, and communication was very siloed, and paranoia and fear started building up. And there's like 3 books now written about this, and those books, they paint a portrait that there was a bunch of very brilliant people that got 2 doses of brains and half a dose of social skills, myself included. And when you put them into a high-stress, hippie-like situation, it breeds a lot of conspiracy theories and fear and these types of things. And frankly, there was just too many founders. So at some point, you have to consolidate. And there was really two different paths that Vitalik could choose. He was sitting in the middle. He could pick the business side, which is what I was advocating, and Anthony DiOrio and Joe Lubin were advocating, or he could pick the tech, crypto anarchy, not-for-profit, egalitarian, meritocratic open source world, which is what Gavin and Jeff were pushing. And ultimately, our side lost. Amir Shatrit left, and I left at the same time. And then shortly thereafter, Anthony left, and then Joe went on to do Consensus and monetize a whole different area. And then obviously the tech people, it was Lord of the Flies. They ate themselves. They nearly spent all of the ICO money. They launched Ethereum. I think they had less than $500,000 in treasury of the original 18 million that they ran. And they got very lucky that Ethereum became very valuable very quickly. That allowed them to replenish the treasury, and now it's a success. But just like Tesla in 2008, they were damn near bankrupt. So, in hindsight, could we have found a more amicable way, or could I have done things very different? Of course. At the time I was 25, 26 years old. It was the first time I've ever done anything at a scale like that. There's a reason I became a mathematician and not an MBA. I don't have those native skills. It took me about a decade to slowly aggregate and learn how to lead a company and actually be accountable to a company and run a software project and run a science project. And, my work stands for itself. With IOHK, we've published 92 papers. I think over 10,000 citations. I mean, an academic career for, somebody who's been around for 40 years or 50 years. We did all of that in just a 4-year period from when we bootstrapped our scientific to actually getting serious about paper production. And then we built an engineering company that not only can deliver a product as complex as Cardano to market, but do it in a very exotic programming language, Haskell, find talent there, and then actually go and improve Haskell, the programming language itself, and compile it to JavaScript and to WebAssembly and so forth. So I have 6 years of history at IOHK, and I have 6 months of history at Ethereum. What's so disheartening is that Ethereum is the big project, and Cardano isn't quite there yet. So Ethereum is what everybody knows me for. And so they only had 6 months of data where I had limited ability to influence and control things. And I was just one brick in the wall amongst many. And then at IOG, I've been the CEO, the big guy, so I've had the ability at my company to demonstrate what a vision would look like. And a lot of people often ask, well, what would have happened with Ethereum had you stayed? So we've already run that experiment. It would look a lot like Cardano, so how we built Cardano, the approach we took, that's exactly what Ethereum would look like. And similarly, they ask, well, what would have happened to Ethereum had Gavin Wood had more say? Well, we already ran that experiment. We have Polkadot, and that's exactly what Ethereum would have looked like. It will look a lot more like Polkadot and less like F2 and so forth. So in many ways, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It allowed all of us, Gavin, myself, Vitalik, to be our own guys and to pursue our own visions and build our own communities. And I think the cryptocurrency space is much richer as a consequence, because all the things we've done are open source. So love us or hate us, the ideas are percolating and being shared, and we learn from them, they learn from us, and ultimately the communities all benefit in that respect.
I'm glad you mentioned the community, because a big mission for me is sometimes when there's, let's face it, sometimes there's some serious conflict within the crypto community saying this coin's better or that coin's better. And a message that I try to put forward is, well, we all progress forward. So if one coin's sort of going up and another coin's going up, not as fast, the entire crypto community is progressing, because in the bigger picture, I find in my world, I'm trying to sell crypto as a concept to those who are not in the crypto space at all. And then within the crypto community, you have this in-house fighting. When you mentioned Gavin and Polkadot, we now have the three big runners, arguably, Polkadot, Ethereum, and Cardano. Is there the space for these three to operate together, or in parallel, if you will, or will there only be one winner in this smart contract space? Will there only be Cardano or Polkadot or Ethereum, or will they all coexist?
Well, I've been in the space long enough to watch the top 10 on CoinMarketCap change a lot. I remember Feathercoin and Peercoin and Freycoin and Namecoin and these things. So stuff changes. The only constant is change. So, who knows if it's Polkadot, Ethereum, and Cardano. It does look like we're heading to a Mexican standoff, and, it's going to be a good, the bad, the ugly type of a deal. We don't know which one's wearing a poncho. But we'll find out what happens. The market will decide that. But I think we have the wrong mentality when we look at things in a sum-zero way. At the end of the day, we have to say, are we solving the problems we set out to solve? And there's two sets of them. One are conceptual, and then the other problems are actual. So the conceptual problems are convincing people that you can run governance, you can run systems in a fundamentally different way. Money is a great example of that. We say, oh, okay, two options. You can have private money or public money. So either have a central bank that a government controls or a bank issues a currency. Both of these have screwed the pooch. There's been over 100 plus years of history in modern central banking, and in private banking, we've seen all the way back to the Rothschilds and their gold certificates. In all cases, they just don't work out well. Last year, we printed $6 trillion of money out of thin air to pay for stuff, and they have the audacity to say, I still have to pay taxes. Why? If you're telling me you can print $6 trillion and it's not going to have inflation, why don't you just do that every year and pay for everything? Why not just helicopter money in monetary theory? See, that's the logical inconsistency and the temptation of the printing press. And in private money, look at Tether or these other things. There's a lot of allegations flowing around that maybe they're a fractional reserve, and even if they're not, it's real tempting to be a private business and sit on $25 billion of cash and be like, well, nobody will really know if I take a little bit and maybe invest it in this or do it in that or something like that. That's what the Rothschilds did with their gold certificates. They say, hey, people aren't redeeming these at the rate of issuance, so we could go fractional and nobody would even notice, and look how much money we'd make from that seniorage. Okay, so when you have those types of situations occur, maybe it's better to have a third option. And that's what Bitcoin basically did. It said, this is a deflationary money system, value system. It's like a proto-commodity. It's like digital gold that allows you to build money. And it's not run by a government. It's not run by a bank. It's something new. So that's the conceptual side of cryptocurrencies. And there's all kinds of concepts: voting, property rights, identity, okay, making decisions in a transnational way. And every time you demonstrate a killer use case like that, then everybody can point to it and say, I know that works. And that becomes a permanent social building block that you can use for a business. It's almost like when you're successful, they say, I want to be the Uber of X, the Tesla of Y, right? There's this concept that the business model works and we want to emulate or replicate this kind of idea. Then the actual is doing stuff. And so success for me in the space is saying, did we make a difference? How did we choose to spend our lives? So I look at the world system, and I did a TED Talk back in 2014. I've just said the same thing over and over and over again. And I'll keep saying it. Maybe one day it'll happen. We live in two worlds. We live in the developed world and the developing world. In the developing world, they're unbanked for the most part. And despite the fact that they're just as smart as us, they work harder than we do, and they're just as human as you and me, they are shafted because their systems are terrible. They live in capital controls and corrupt governments, and they live in areas where there's not good rule of law, and they don't have stable currencies, and as a consequence, no real good banking infrastructure, no good risk management infrastructure, and so forth. So they can't build wealth of no fault of their own. They lost the geographic lottery. They were just unlucky. Okay, so the point of our technology is to take a step back and say, why don't we just give them a new system? We talk about DeFi. Who's going to be using DeFi? The 25-year-old yield farming kid in New Jersey living in his mom and dad's basement? Or is it going to be the farmer in Ethiopia that's trying to get a fertilizer voucher and can actually, if he gets it, afford to repay you a 15% interest rate? It's going to be the farmer. You see, and that's what gets me up in the morning. And I don't really care if that infrastructure runs on Polkadot or Ethereum or Bitcoin. The reason I built Cardano was that I looked at all the infrastructures. I looked at their roadmap, and I realized they're trying to chase the wrong markets. They're dealing in the wrong ponds, and they're not going to really proactively go to that part of the world and help them out. So if we built Cardano the right way, it would be built in a way that would be maximally beneficial to as many people as possible. So yes, the IBMs can use us, and the Microsofts can use us, and the GMs can use us, and we can do supply chain and, all of these other things. Sure, but that's not the point. What I'm going to do is wake up and direct our commercial efforts, my company's commercial efforts, to Ethiopia and to the country of Georgia and to Southeast Asia and to Mongolia. But it's an open protocol. So as we do that, everybody else gets to use the protocol for their own use and utility. And what's so cool is you can have a merging of two worlds. So they say, well, it creates use and adoption. Would you like 10 million new customers who are under the age of 30, who are highly digitized, with rapidly growing income, who have no brand preferences? Well, of course. So, okay, come on board, build applications for that and so forth. So this is the beautiful thing where we each get to touch the elephant in a different way. And maybe somebody gets the tail and somebody gets the tusk. I am looking at it from one particular mission and viewpoint, but to solve that, I've abstracted it and built a generic framework. And I believe what we've constructed can satisfy the demands of billions of people. And as a consequence, I also believe what we've built will, in the long term, be the most competitive platform for all of these use cases. Because you know what? Whether you build a fair election system in Senegal or you build a fair election system in America, it's the same problem. And if I can make it work for some of the poorest people in the world and bring them a better election system than the one we have in the United States, why don't we go to the US with it after we've demonstrated that it works there? That's how you really get real growth and adoption and change and get it at scales and levels that we didn't think were possible before. And that's really what I'm focused on. I don't think too much about the day-to-day of Polkadot versus Ethereum versus this, because, you know, it used to be EOS and Tezos. And flip the page, it's going to be Avalanche and F2 next year. And then it'll be something else. It'll be Bobcoin, you know, and okay. What really matters is, do you have laser focus on the vision, the market, and the problems you want to solve? And are you willing to take the risk to be there? We've been in Ethiopia for 3 years. We've invested millions of dollars into this strategy, and we have people physically live in these jurisdictions, and they fight hard every day, and they get a lot of no's and a lot of disappointments, and they deal with a lot of craziness. My director of African operations was once arrested at the airport for the crime of carrying too much money out of the country. He had, because you have to pay everybody in cash. He had a lot of bear, the local currency of Ethiopia, and he was just about to fly back to London, and they searched him at the airport, and they tried to say that he was evading capital controls and exporting bear. And I was like, I don't think anybody's trying to take your money and bring it to England. Okay, this guy's half English, half Ethiopian. He was visiting his family in London, so he had to get a pardon from the prime minister for it. I mean, talk about difficulty of doing business. Most people complained that, you know, their flight came in early and they had to wait at the hotel for a while for their hotel room to be to be open. This is literally like you're getting arrested at the airport for carrying cash with you, the cash of the country with you. Could you imagine having like $3,000 in US dollars in your pocket and then leaving America and they arrest you at JFK? Crazy.
A similar thing happened with David Hay, an Australian crypto commentator. His focus is on Venezuela. His wife is from Venezuela, and he was trying to leave Venezuela with bags of cash, but that bags of local currency was only equal to about $100 US dollars, but because it was worth so little. And he was arrested at the airport, and what they were looking for was not, in fact, the local currency. They were looking for US dollars in those piles of cash because they thought that he was actually pulling US dollars hidden within the local currency.
Right.
So what was really ironic with that is that they weren't actually too concerned about their money leaving the country. They were worried about US dollars leaving the country. But I must admit, Charles, what you say is very inspiring to me, and it sings the same tune as Andreas Antonopoulos speaks to us. So I think one of the most inspirational people in the crypto space for me is Andreas, because he never shills a coin, he's never selling a product, but he speaks pretty much what you were just saying about banking the unbanked, getting more people into the financial world, people who can't get a bank account because they're not even allowed to walk into the bank branch itself. Don't worry about not having the documentation to open a bank account. He goes into the fact that some people don't have the right shoes to walk into a bank branch to open that bank account. And I think this is where a lot of passion for many people who go beyond, buying a Lambo, who go beyond the technology of crypto, but to the actual real life opportunities it creates for humans around the world, banking the unbanked. And for those who are already banked, breaking away from corrupt systems. I guess this is a good segue into DeFi. When it comes to Cardano's ability to store identity on-chain to help DeFi into the mainstream, how do you deal with identity around DeFi using Cardano's smart contracts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, first, Andreas is an interesting guy. I mean, he's Greek, and, part of being an older Greek is, they didn't win the country lottery. I mean, you have this incredible country that has this amazing history and legacy, but everything is in decline. There's ruins everywhere. And so you look at the Parthenon, you imagine, wow, that was a great building. Looking up at the Acropolis, it's like, wow, but it's no longer. And so you're constantly reminded of the good old days. And then you have this Greek pessimism that's kind of bathed the entire country, where no one pays taxes, everybody's cynical, and everybody hates the government. They're always trying to screw you and so forth. And we have a lot of Greeks in the company. We have a lab at University of Athens. My chief scientist is Greek. And what's so sad is, like, the most prominent Greeks don't live in Greece. There's the diaspora. They leave and they go somewhere else for opportunity. So it's no coincidence that one of the most prominent educators and voices in the cryptocurrency space happens to come from that environment, because I'd imagine for him it's very deeply personal. He's seen firsthand the corruption. He's seen firsthand the bias. He's seen firsthand the inequalities that have occurred. And he says, wow, we finally have something that can inoculate society to all of these evils and make it better. As for not shilling coins, you have to admire that, because he could have many, many times throughout his career and literally made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Instead, he spent his time mastering Bitcoin. He spent his time educating and doing lectures and carrying the torch. And a lot of people don't give him enough credit for that. So I think Andreas is a great guy and definitely a force for good in the cryptocurrency space for all the years I've known him. Now, in terms of identity, to your specific question, we have a framework called PRISM. And one of the things we closely looked at is what John Klippinger did with the whole self-sovereign identity movement, and what happened with the development of the DID from Manu Sporny and his cohorts at the W3C. And what's occurring is we're having a renaissance in identity representation and attestation, as well as portability and storage. So the DIF, the Digital Identity Foundation, has more than 30 members, including Microsoft and our company, and we're all talking about open standards where you have a portable identity that's almost like a URL to a web page, because you have a URL that leads you to an HTML document. We have a DID and a DID document. So the DID tells you where it's at and gives you a unique identifier, almost like a domain name. And then your document is, who are you? And you can put any assets you want. You can put cryptographic credentials. You can put metadata like your height, your age, medical history, whatever it have you. And what the W3C has done, the standards body, one of the standards bodies of the internet, is created an exhaustive specification for a DID. So what we did is we took that spec, as has Microsoft for their system, and there's like 10 other identity systems that are emerging from sovereign to others, and we all are now interoperable with each other. And what we can do is we can use a blockchain to store DIDs. We can use a blockchain to help with the revocation process and other such things. So the PRISM framework and its companion Mirror deals with the issuance of DIDs, the revocation of DIDs, and the Mirror framework deals with KYC and AML. The KYC component of knowing who people are, so you can validate these things. Then it's a very interesting question of how do you embed that into a workable cryptocurrency system. So you have all these things that require identity. Stake pool operators require identity. You have apps require identity. So it's not just human beings, it's companies and concepts and machines. They require unique identifiers inside of a system. The same situation with wallets. There's the FATF travel rule. There's also the Treasury Department regulations that recently came out, and FinCEN saying we want identity connected to wallets. So how do you do all of that? So you create a cryptographic credential, a DID, you embed it into Daedalus, you embed it into your cryptocurrency, and then you give the user the ability to decide what they want to attach to their identity. And then what you do is you create privacy by design in that type of a system. So you create an aliasing system so you can have one-off identities, and they can be known to certain actors, but other actors, they can't be linked back to your main identity. You introduce zero-knowledge cryptography, so you can do threshold proofs where you prove properties, like you're a member of a set. For example, I'm an American, or I'm over the age of 21 for drinking in America, huzzah, that type of stuff. And then you also introduce other things like encrypting identity. So from the outside, everybody would just think it's noise. They can't discern what that data happens to be. However, the people with the decryption keys, maybe the regulator or the regulated business you're doing business with, has the ability to de-anonymize that. And the point is that you put the individual in control of all of that. That's the core concept of self-sovereign identity. So it's not handed to you. It doesn't come from the government. It doesn't come from a business. It comes from you. And then it's your decision about how much you want to say, how you want to upgrade that, who you're going to get to vouch for you. And then you get a whole bag of tools to make that an easy process. And how much you do is going to depend upon the geography you happen to live in. China, for example, they have social credit and they're very draconian about things. They're going to ask for a lot of information. Switzerland and other places, they respect privacy much more so. And they have strong regulations to keep things as private as possible. So you have much less information. You start with a framework that's composable and you allow people to build up their profiles accordingly. And then when you enter into a certain economy, you can either be more relaxed or stricter about how you apply your identity to commercial transactions.
So with this in mind, do you think there's going to be one blockchain to rule them all, or will it be an interconnected network of blockchains facilitated by something like Chainlink or Arc or something that hasn't even been created yet?
I think that we're going to have an internet of blockchains because blockchains are just a trust engine and they're usually contextual to a domain. And so there's the trust engine for healthcare. For example, there's a huge problem of portability of medical records. We're starting to look at this with vaccine passports. How do you prove you've been vaccinated? So what if you have a vaccine certificate and you come from Zimbabwe? Will Switzerland trust that? Will America trust that? How do we know it's legitimate and has been forged? And vice versa. How does the Zimbabwean doctor know that your American vaccine passport issued in the state of Wyoming by a local doctor is actually legitimate, right? Unless they see your medical records. How do you even show them that? And why would you do that? Because what assurances would you get that your records will be kept confidential when they cross country lines and they enter under different privacy standards for different countries? So there's a huge amount of discussion about a meta database that's blockchain based for the movement of medical records and the verification of medical information for the commons. COVID has kind of forced that upon the world. And that's just an example. That is not going to be the same database, the same blockchain as Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano. It's going to be special purpose and likely run by a consortium of large actors. Now, it might then be interconnected to another blockchain project like Cardano and use it as a service for certain things, like a payment system or an identity layer or a computation layer to do complex computations. Okay? And that's the point of an internet of blockchain, is that you now start looking at each of these things as domain specific, consuming other domains and services. Another example would be autonomous vehicles. Okay, that's a horribly difficult problem to sort out because you have this issue of vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication. And we have standards like 802.11p Wi-Fi, for example, but there's dozens of discussions about that. But the problem is you can't trust one vendor to be in control of vehicle to vehicle communication. That's too powerful, right? So how does GM and Ford and Honda and Toyota and Tesla and BMW and Mercedes-Benz and all these other manufacturers, how do they get along? And how do they create an open standard for their vehicles to talk to each other? Because if you're talking about self-driving cars, that's a requirement. They have to be able to talk to each other and to infrastructure to understand things that the onboard systems can't interpret themselves. Like, for example, 2 miles up ahead, there's a car crash or something like that. It'd be nice if something tells your car that, and the cars that happen to be up ahead could actually do that. But wait a minute, how can we avoid hackers from breaking into this thing and manipulating the network and so forth? Wow, there's a whole security layer, and there's this notion of trusted hardware that has to fit in. That's a very different type of blockchain infrastructure than the medical record infrastructure. There, latency is king and local consensus is king. You don't have time to go to some protocol, wait 10 minutes for a block to confirm. Whereas in the medical record system, doesn't matter if you have to wait an extra 5 seconds or 10 seconds for that permission to come through to the doctor or the hospital that you're at. Probably not. It's not going to make any difference. But there, 5 to 10 seconds can be life or death with a vehicle driving or a drone in the sky or something like that. So there's no way one architecture, one design, one system can handle all of these different problems. But all of these problems have value. They have people. They have information. So interoperability is super important. The ability to move value, information, and people between these different systems is really what matters. So the connecting tissue, the internet of blockchains that connects all of them together is really what matters as an industry. Just like Wi-Fi, everybody has a take on how to do Wi-Fi. ASUS has their router and Netgear has their router and so forth. But there are standards that they follow to guarantee interoperability, and we can move between them, and everybody has their particular flavor. They say our version of Wi-Fi 6E is so much better than their version because we have this special beamforming antenna. And similarly, our blockchain is much better for IoT, for vehicles, than your blockchain, and that's great. But I, as a consumer, are going to be moving between these systems. I'll be sitting in the self-driving car, and then I'm going to go visit the doctor and have that record, and then I'm going to want to pay for lunch. So I need to use the payment processing blockchain that processes billions of payments per day, all different demands. So I believe there's going to be an internet, and there's going to be thousands, if not millions, of these things floating around.
One of those demands that certainly excites me, in particular with relation to medical, is a logistical supply control. So not to speak of a certain coin, but it's just one coin that I think is doing quite well, and is VeChain right. Thor, controlling this logistical supply system. Like, how do I know the medicine that I'm about to take is legitimate? How do I know this aircraft part that I'm about to put in this state-of-the-art piece of machinery that's carrying 200 people across the Pacific Ocean? How do I know that this aircraft part is legitimately what it claims to be? And this is where I see the power of blockchain actually saving lives, beyond the banking power, beyond making sure the medical records are up to date. Another one is baby formula. A big issue that we have in Australia at the moment is there's a massive run on baby formula, where many Chinese locals, if you will, are buying a lot of baby formula and sending it straight back to China, because there's no guarantee that the baby formula in that country is legitimate. And babies are literally dying because they're eating formula that is not real. But when it comes to Cardano facilitating the interconnected network of blockchains, do you play a part of that? And if so, how?
So that's one of the pillars of a third generation cryptocurrency, is the cryptocurrency's ability to communicate with things that aren't itself. So you need sidechain protocols, you need Oracle protocols, and so forth. And the frustration is it's not a technological problem as much as it is a business problem. Seldom do interoperability standards get selected by technical merit. There's a reason Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is Bluetooth and so forth. And it has very little to do with the fact that they happen to be the best available protocol on market. It's entirely possible that there are other protocols that just for whatever reason end up becoming the standard. Like the lingua franca of the internet's JavaScript. If we got a do-over, we would have done that a lot differently than JavaScript, because it was just such a bad language, but it just caught on and we just had to deal with it, right? So standards, they sometimes get set in mysterious ways. The duty of Cardano is to bring some scientific rigor to the conversation and some adult conversations about history. So go build your standards within Hyperledger, within the W3C, within the IETF, within the bodies that really make a lot of sense to do that, and do the science to know what fundamental capabilities. So we've systemized a lot of knowledge about cross-chain communication, about oracles, about sidechain protocols. Like we invented the NEPA-PALs, for example. Okay, and as a consequence, we kind of know what you can and cannot do when you're moving value, information, and people between systems. And then begins the standards wars, where we and other systems come in and we talk a lot about how do we do that in a sensible way. And maybe we win, maybe we don't win. But if we don't win, what we do is we adopt that standard, whatever the market standard happens to be. And then begins the service-oriented era of blockchains. So you mentioned VeChain, for example. They're killing it in supply chains in certain respects. Great. But there are certain things that system just doesn't do. So maybe the VeChain guys, when you write a VeChain application, could then use Cardano for certain parts of that application and another blockchain for other parts of that application or something like that. Like, for example, let's say Avalanche hits market and it's very strong. It's great for IoT. So maybe you're talking about a supply chain that is bathed in lots of sensors. So you run the IoT part with Avalanche, you run the supply chain part with VeChain, and then you have value moving between the systems. So you issue the token on Cardano. There you go. You see, so now you have three different systems, and the systems are all working together. And if you have a DEX, you can actually pay all the fees with the underlying unit of account of each system. And then there's a resource question. And you might even have a shortest path algorithm and use multiple blockchains, and whichever one is the cheapest of the day, that's the service you're thinking. So it's almost like load balancing on servers amongst different types of cloud infrastructure. That's the market we'll move to, and these interoperability protocols will allow us to do that with safety and low latency and reliability. It'll take about 3 to 5 years, I think, for the industry to get to that point. So what Cardano's contributing is we're working with the standards bodies, we're working in the academy And we're taking a very rigorous approach, and we're trying to get an understanding of theoretical capabilities of what can you do and what you can't do. Like if you can't do it, when I say that, I say we have an impossibility theorem. We've actually proven it's not possible. There's an attack that it can exist or something like that. And if you can do it, what are the trade-offs? And those are usually time, settlement time, transaction cost, transaction complexity, the introduction of a trusted third party, or something like that. We're trying to really understand what that design space looks like. But the problem is maximalism is the enemy of interoperability. And so this maximalist viewpoint that people have is retarding, it's slowing down the progress of interoperability protocols. So it's really important that we take a step back and we just try to be very dispassionate, take our tokens out of the equation, and focus on what's good for the consumer and what's good for the overall industry, which is how do we build these different protocols in the maximally beneficial way for all actors, even if it at times adds some hindrances to our particular protocols.
When I run my own thought experiments in the land of crypto, I think about Google. So if you look at Google as an example, first when internet was developing, you had Hotmail that was kind of, or AOL, they were the kind of like the main email. And then you had navigation, which individual units that you were sold on navigation. And then you had different applications that were all different companies in themselves. And then they all kind of merged, if you will, onto one platform, which was Google, which kind of did it all and knocked a lot of businesses out of the water.
Right.
I guess what I was wondering is, could that in fact in the long term happen with crypto? Could there be a Google of crypto? And some argue, when I've had this discussion in the crypto community, that in fact Cardano is poised, if there were to be such a thing, Cardano would be poised to be the Google of crypto.
Yeah, so you have to understand the difference between the protocol and the on-ramp and the interface to the protocol. And the beautiful thing about crypto is that crypto separates these really elegantly. The tech world has not. So social media is the canonical example of this. When you look at Facebook, for example, they control the information protocol. So they control where the river goes and how the river flows. And they also control the website that you use to access that river and share the information with your friends and family. If they were separated, deplatforming wouldn't be an issue. Because, for example, Parler versus Twitter, you would use the same underlying protocol between the two, and Parler and Twitter would just be different interfaces to that. And they couldn't be deplatformed, right? And so they have different curation standards, different communities, but they could coexist, and nobody could shut Parler out of that underlying protocol. So as long as you build your infrastructure this way, then you don't have to worry so much about these Googles or these Facebooks or these Microsofts, because they're just value adding. What they're doing is building these great ecosystems, delivering great experiences. But if they dislike you, they can't use their market position to punish you and prevent you from using the underlying infrastructure, whether that be the app store or the payment layer or your ability to connect with people and communicate with people and so forth. So we look to Cardano in this way. We say, okay, well, Cardano is an identity system. It's a payment system. It's a computation system. It's a democracy engine because it has catalysts, so you can hold votes, not just for Cardano, but eventually dApps will use Catalyst as governance as a service, and then they can build their whole government around those voting stacks and hold votes and so forth. No one can shut you out of any of that. Once you're in, whether Charles Hoskinson likes you or not, whether IOG likes you or not, you're in, okay? And you can do whatever you want there. Now, whether you're successful, you can build a network effect, you can build a viable business. That depends a lot on whether people like you, the content of your character, the things you say, the relationships you have, and so forth. So obviously there are some best practices to consider there, but that's if you wish to be successful, but you can't be shut out of these things. So I don't think of it more like, am I the Google or not, or should we pursue Google or not, or is Cardano the Google or not? I think of it more of how do we separate things in layers so we can have our cake and eat it too. We can maximize fairness and equality and prevent deplatforming through collusion and corruption and monopolies or political inconvenience. But at the same time, we can still create a competitive free market where the best ideas can win, and they don't get to use the fact that they have one to shut out future competitors, which is what we typically see in these types of markets.
I see this as a bit of a dichotomy of Bitcoin. I recently released a mini documentary on Bitcoin, and I spoke about the biggest threats to Bitcoin. The third point I raised in that was the power that it takes away from government. So you raised the Parler Twitter example. To me, that's really concerning. I thought we were in a democracy, and I thought freedom of speech was apparent. Evidently, that may not be the case, because if someone's saying something that a company doesn't like, we can silence that person. And then if another company comes to market and say, well, you can use our platform, the big company can say, well, we're going to disband in that platform entirely, which was hugely alarming to me. So in one sense, when it comes to this dichotomy, you've got crypto is loved by the people because it enables everyone to have an equal voice, equal access, equal spread of information, whether information be to your medical records, tweeting something out into the Twitter sphere or whatever it will be in the future, sending an email or sending money. But then you've got the other side. Governments lose a lot of control when we introduce crypto, whether that be through the power of money, creating money, fractional reserve lending,
Right.
quantitative easing, all the tools around money, or the distribution of information. Do you think that, is it possible that governments could in fact be a threat to cryptocurrencies in the future?
Governments are made up of the people, and this is the thing: is people. One of the greatest sins, I think, that violated what the American experiment was trying to give the world was this view that the government is different from us and it's the enemy, and we have to protect ourselves from the government. The whole John Locke notion of things is it's a public trust, and we're the beneficiary of that. The government is a trustor. They're given special powers and funding, but the point is that they're trying to create social good. So what we need to do is, stop being so conspiratorial and cynical in viewing the government as this monolithic power machine that's just there to screw us, and instead say, okay, how do we use this technology to transform our governments, transform the way we elect our leaders, transform the way information is reported, transform auditing and transparency and accountability, transform government services, and so forth. And then what happens is you eat them alive through those systematic transformations. And those who are corrupt, they have a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller place to hide. And then the other thing is it becomes indefensible, because they're basically saying, oh, we have to stop this stuff. And everything, wait, you have to stop the system that's going to give us fair voting? You have to stop the system that forces you to be transparent? And if you're in a democratic system, ideally you elect people, right? So if people are consistently doing that, you just have to make sure you have a memory and you're good at running political campaigns. And in a few cycles, you can get rid of those people, and you really can change things. I was part of the Ron Paul movement, and that was a real tough thing because we lost and we won. So we lost 2 presidential campaigns, and we lost the audit, the Fed, and all of these other things. And it was so disheartening because so many people supported us, and so many people would say, well, this is just common sense. On the other hand, we got a senator elected, Rand Paul. We created a Liberty Caucus. And now that's permanently part of the American political conversation. Every single year, we now have people saying maybe all these wars, we shouldn't have them. Maybe we should have sound money. Maybe we should get rid of the spy state. We weren't having those conversations at that level with that level of legitimacy 10 years ago. So the movement made some progress as a consequence of that initial impulse. What blockchain does is it allows you not only to make that progress, but when you make progress, you've permanently replaced a government utility. And after you've done that, it's really hard to get the cat back into the bag. You can't, nobody can argue to regress it to the old system. They're like, well, yeah, I understand this blockchain voting system is working out and it's much faster and it's provably secure and it's fraud free, but let's go back to paper ballots. We really should do that. It's like, no. It's like saying, hey, we know this internet thing is great, but we should really go back to paper newspapers. Come on, let's go do that. It's like you can't put that cat back.
It's a brilliant point. I don't know why we wouldn't use blockchain technology in voting. It's so transparent, immutable, open source. Do you think the next election in the United States will be run on the blockchain?
No, and there's very good reasons right now not to. There's a great paper that was written by one of the pioneers in cryptography, Ron Rivest, and his colleagues at MIT, and they actually explain the hazards of a digital voting system. There are huge challenges to building an auditable, transparent, and fair digital voting system, and that's the problem. And so, this technology in concept is very easy to sell, and we saw that with the internet. In the early 90s, like the true pioneers of the internet, they said, guys, this thing is going to change everything, and they were right. And the problem was they were also wrong when they said right now. It took 30 years for us to actually see the rise of all these internet empires, and they're still imperfect and there are a lot of problems. So timing happens to be the problem. I see the future, and I believe before I die, we will have blockchain-based voting systems that are trusted and secure. I don't believe that that's going to happen tomorrow, and I do believe it's going to require an enormous amount of effort to get them installed, and it'll be just like Bitcoin, where it's kind of like not really popular, not really popular, not really, and then finally you have some bellwether moments, and then suddenly, vroom, it goes way up. So it'll be the same situation. Same for legalization of marijuana in the United States. It's all illegal, and then every now and then you see some cracks forming, and now it's inevitable that all 50 states marijuana will be legal. So it's the same movement. Gay marriage was another example of that. For the longest time, it's nothing, and then suddenly it's legal in all 50 states. So we'll get there, but it might take 10 years, it may take 20 years, and we're going to have a couple of really great case studies where it clearly works. People have tried to attack it, and it just somehow defeated that, and it moved on. Just like Bitcoin has really changed the monetary policy conversation. It's taken 12 years to be an overnight success. And it'll take 12 more years for them to actually have a real impact on monetary policy of nation states. The first nation to adopt the cryptocurrency, for example, as its sovereign currency and treat it like the euro, in which they don't actually control the central bank, but rather it has a decentralized monetary policy, that'll be a weird event. But within a century, it could end up becoming the thing that creates a world reserve currency that no one controls, and it de-dollarizes the dollar.
Yeah, I think a digital payment method is, well, we're already there. We already use digital money, but it's just, do we want to use digital fiat or digital crypto? And as we see China release the DCEP, I think it stands for the Digital Currency Electronic Payment.
Right.
It appears that they might be rushing for their crypto to be the world currency. And then there's argument about the gold standard coming back. And then we have cryptos linked to gold, and then you have the digital gold of Bitcoin. And I think you raised a good point about timing. Will this stuff work? Yes. Will it work tomorrow? Well, it's the same. The good analogy that you gave was the internet. But when we look at Goguen as an example, going back to Cardano, so Goggen's your focus for the launch in February, but beyond Goguen, let's say in 5 to 10 years, where do you see Cardano being used most?
Well, I'd hope we'd have 100 million or 200 million, perhaps more African users, and lots in Eastern Europe and lots in Southeast Asia. And it's the day-to-day platform for a financial operating system. Your land registration's on it. You're getting loans on it. You're communicating with your friends and family with it. You're doing payments with it. You're securitizing your business with it and raising money with it. You're running your country's stock market on it. You're running your national elections on it. I would love to see Cardano do that within 5 or 10 years. And I actually think it's possible, especially for countries that are in the market for new systems, where they're actively trying to change. With Georgia, for example, the way we structured everything, it's very likely that within the next 5 years, every university diploma in that country issued will by default be verified and validated by the Cardano blockchain. So every one of those students, that's normal for them. And then we can extend that to the national payment system, the track and tracing of tourism, 1,000 different things, tax collection. That can be normal for them. And it's really not that hard once your foot is in the door to start adding layers to that system. So I think we have a real good shot for Cardano to provide that. And what's nice is you have natural utility and demand then. You'll have organically, as a consequence of these systems, billions of transactions every single day. And the way the economics are built in Cardano, that creates sustainability, because you no longer need inflation to compensate the stake pool operators or the treasury system. The transaction fees alone will be valuable enough to actually cover the day-to-day operations of the system. So you have built in a growth engine that will continue paying VC to grow the system and continue capturing markets. And then you have another positive feedback loop that pays for more and more competition to run more and more infrastructure to make the system more decentralized. And with Hydra and other technology we've been investing in, we're going from a replicated to distributed system. So as we add more competition, instead of just getting more security, you also get more scale. So that's the magic of the protocols we've had. We figured out a way to get demand through public-private partnerships and getting these new governments on board, and that demand will generate organically billions of dollars of value, which translates to sustainability and growth of the system. And so we have a positive feedback loop that'll just keep going and going and going. And then we're wired into the academies, so we have a decentralized brain. Regardless of what happens to me, you have hundreds of scientists all around the world waking up every day, working full-time for Cardano. and writing protocols for Cardano. So you have all these young, renewable, faceless minds. Doesn't matter where they're from. They can be Mongolia, or they can be Eritrea, they can be, America, writing protocols. And so you're always innovating, and you're innovating at a scale that no other company can innovate at, no other, blockchain can innovate at. So we'll always have a scientific and protocol advantage, especially as we deal with more and more complex problems over every other system. That's my hope.
The example that you gave there with the degrees is fantastic. I was listening to a podcast just yesterday, actually, about buying a degree. You could get Masters of Businesses in certain Middle East states for $120 US. And there was no real way of certifying it. And some of the stamps on these degrees, they were amazing. They seem to be the original stamp. But of course, bring in the blockchain and you can't, these things fraudulent. So I think you've got a fantastic real life case study there that as soon as you do that, I cannot see any reason why other universities wouldn't adopt that as a certification of their degrees.
Right. And then you get 2 or 3 countries, you get inter-country agreements, you get Georgia, maybe then Italy or Greece, and then suddenly it becomes a European standard. Then the whole EU ratifies it within 5 or 10 years, and you're the de facto infrastructure. So even though it's an open standard, you'll capture 80% of the market. It's the same for CBDCs, so China's doing one, so America's got to do one, and they got to get a little bit more friendly with crypto regulation, but then they'll create standards for CBDCs, and then every central bank will want to do it. And then what you do is you say, hey guys, we're the settlement layer. Get rid of BIS. 2/3 of these banks are non-BIS members anyway, so just come deploy on our system and use us as a settlement system, and we'll be the best deployer of that particular standard. So even though Tezos will probably have one and Algorand will have one and so forth, we'll get 8 for every one that they get, and that alone creates billions of transactions every week in volume. So these are the kinds of things that I'm very excited about. We've been building and building and building for so long, and now to actually go out there into the arena and commercialize is just so much fun. And the fact that we have this built-in venture capital engine with Catalyst that creates hundreds of millions of dollars to go and collect these deals and bring them into the ecosystem, and to encourage in a very egalitarian way. We had people in Africa who got funded with Fund 2. It's so incredible to see that, a small scale fund is able to have so much reach, and it'll turn from dozens to hundreds to thousands of projects every 6 to 8 weeks. Is incredible too, because they bring their networks, their families, their friends into the system, and then they personalize it. So it's not Cardano Charles Hoskinson edition, it's Cardano, John Smith edition. And so that's a really powerful thing, because it's now their protocol, and they've found their own seat at the table.
I wanted to say congratulations on your successful Fund 2 Catalyst vote. Just on that, for those who haven't heard about it, what is Project Catalyst, and how can people get involved for future funds?
Yeah, so we're building a whole stack of voting into Cardano, and we're partnered with a lot of great companies and think tanks. For example, we're partnered with an innovation management company called IdeaScale. They've been around for almost a decade. They work with Pfizer and Boeing. So you ask, how did Pfizer come up with that vaccine so quickly? They use IdeaScale. So we basically brought them in along with some decentralized tooling, and we created a whole new voting system. We spent 4 years researching how to do a private blockchain-based voting system out of Lancaster University that can scale to lots of users. And basically what we've been doing is systematically launching funds. So the treasury of Cardano takes some of the inflation that normally you'd give to stake pool operators or miners, and it gives it to a decentralized account, and then people submit ballots to get funded. And then over time, people can vet those ballots, and it goes through a process like a gauntlet. And if they survive, they can vote. And if enough votes come in, you get funded. So Fund 2 was the first time we did this in an open process for everybody. Anyone who holds ADA can participate. And we had over 5,000 community members show up, participate, very aggressive dialogue, and it was only $250,000. Despite that, they put in probably collectively 10,000, 100,000 hours of time into debates, discussions, and poor Dor, the product manager for that, he didn't sleep at all for a while. And then what happened was we approved, the community approved collectively 11 projects. So, and we just published all the voting results. And what's going to happen is every 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to launch a fund. Cardano's going to launch a fund, and they're going to grow. So they'll go from $250,000 to $1 million to larger amounts. And what means more and more people will participate, and eventually a majority of ADA holders will be able to participate and vote right in their wallet, right in Daedalus, or right in Yoroi, or through community-built interfaces and so forth. And we already have a cell phone app we've constructed that works on both iPhone and also on Android. So Catalyst is really cool, and there's a dedicated website for it. But eventually, within just a few months, you'll be able to participate in Catalyst directly through Daedalus itself in a voting center that's built right into the default wallet.
It's really inspirational, Charles. If I may, I'd also like to commend your team. So in the background, I've coordinated a lot of interviews. I've worked with a lot of cryptocurrency creators, but really your team seems quite inspirational. They're very motivated. They're very kind, particularly if I may mention Pierce, Rachel and Michael, all very professional, very nice. And I think that team behind you speaks volumes for the leadership that you're providing, the concept of the coin, where it's going. So, thank you and your team for everything that you're doing in the big picture. Before we close off, I'd like to go into a rapid round with you.
Sure.
So I'm going to mention a word or two, and I would like you to respond in less than 5 words. 1 word is also acceptable, and you may pass on any one. And then just for a warning for everyone out there, I will be asking for a price prediction, but we'll get to that one last. Okay, rapid round. Here we go. Tether.
Insolvent.
XRP.
Probably a security. I hope not.
Federal Reserve.
Morally bankrupt.
China.
Thucydides trap.
Trump.
Orange goblin.
Biden.
Demented goblin.
The Great Reset.
Global conspiracy to take our money away.
The future of democracy.
In our hands.
Like that. Freedom of speech.
1 generation away from being taken away always.
Google.
A incredible company, and also a very destructive one.
And finally, this interview.
Great.
Legend. Okay, now we move on to the big one, my friend. Price prediction for Ada.
You know me well enough.
I know. I've got to put it out.
Prices. I'm friends with a lot of hedge fund guys. One of them owns the New York Mets, and if you're a good trader, you can buy a multi-billion-dollar baseball team. I am not a good trader. I think I've lost more than $3 billion on cryptocurrencies throughout the many years I've been in this space. So there is probably few people in your life you'll meet who have lost more money than me trading. So never get any financial advice from me. I just build them. I just think about the technology and the science. The prices are crazy, and the problem is these are very thin, irrational markets, and they're manipulated in many cases. So even if you're right in the long term, it's impossible to be right in the short term, and there can be black swan events that occur. Like, for example, you could be very bullish about the fundamentals of XRP, and then the SEC comes out and it says something, and then suddenly it falls 50%. Yeah. Or you could be very pessimistic about Ethereum or something like that, and then suddenly Ethereum can announce that the U.S. government's doing its passport system on Ethereum, and then it would double in price or something like that. So events have an enormous impact over price, and the macro fundamentals are very difficult to divine and discern. So I just have given up on trying to understand. I do employ some people, like we do have a financial mathematician. His name's Colin Edwards. He's a quant. And he just wakes up every day and builds these beautiful models and everything. And he sends me emails, and we talk about the markets in general, because we need to kind of understand, for when we do budgets and financial projections, what do we think is going to happen? Do we think Bitcoin is going to stay at 35,000, or do we think it's going to 100,000, or do we think it's going down to 10,000 in these things? And the guy has damn near a PhD in the topic, and he's been doing it for 20 years in the classical markets. And usually the reports I get are question marks, because it's just so difficult to actually get accurate predictions for these things. Like if you asked me in December what I thought we'd had a bull run that we had recently with Ada, I would have never guessed it. I'd say maybe 10%. Who knows? Yeah, but there's other things I thought for sure would create great price appreciation in the markets, or incredible events in the markets, like the fact that institutional money is showing up for cryptocurrencies and they've legitimized it. That's incredible, and it creates a very different market dynamic than the market dynamic we have. And I think it's actually underappreciated by most people. And it is what it is. So I couldn't tell you. All I can say is, you have principles in what you do, and think more about where you'd like to go and why these things have value and hold value and utility, and ask yourself, in 5 years or 10 years, are these things still going to be around? And if you have to be able to answer yes and why, and if that's the case, it's real. If you can't answer yes, then it's not really real. You should probably stay out of it.
Is it fair to say you do hold Bitcoin though?
It's the only two cryptocurrencies. Well, actually, the only three cryptocurrencies I have holdings are Ergo, because I mined some when the network first came out, and I was really fascinated with this non-outsourceable puzzle stuff that Alex Chirpanoy created. So I got some Ergo because I mined it. Bitcoin and Ada, and those are the things. I've never actually held Ether, even though I was a founder of Ethereum. I was entitled to 293,000 Ether, and I gave it to my secretary. I said he can have it because he stayed on a little bit longer and kind of got screwed. And I said, well, I don't know if this Ether they're going to give me is worth anything. So here you go, you take that. I think if I held on to it at the current market cap, it would be worth almost $400 million. But
how's this secretary now? Has he bought you a beer since then?
Oh, he's doing fine. His life is pretty good.
You're a very humble and kind man. If you've got any spare
I didn't know it was going to $1,300 at the time, Adam.
I understand. Hey, my friend's dad has thousands of Ethereum. This is another horror story, and worth tens of millions, hundreds of millions possibly at the moment. And he couldn't find his keys. It's just one of those stories. And he bought it when it was virtually nothing. And in the last bull run, he was unable to sell it because he couldn't find those keys.
Oh, wow. I feel for him. That's so tough. At one time I had over 50,000 Bitcoin just because I traded and mined and all things, but it wasn't worth a lot. So I gave most of it away. I bought an Xbox. It sits in the corner. I won't throw it away because it's the $1 million Xbox.
You should put it in some type of throne or something, some type of throne.
I know. Everybody looks at me like, why do you still have that 360? I say, well, let me tell you how much money I spent on that.
Yeah, like the those pizzas that guy bought for 10,000. But it's all part of the cycle. And
exactly.
Yeah. I never knocked that guy who bought those two pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin because it was. We talk about it being the first transaction in the Bitcoin history, and someone had to do it. And there's other transactions out there that we haven't heard about where people have probably spent thousands. I mean, just that one you said about, how much did you say, 270,000 to your secretary?
293,000 Ether was the allocation that went to me. But, if you actually calculate its value in the Ethereum pre-sale, I think it was like maybe $100,000 worth of Ether or something like that. And I already had a lot of Bitcoin, and so it wasn't like a huge amount to me at that time. And I said, all right, well, he left Japan. He nearly got divorced over the whole thing. He lived like in the same conditions I lived in. He was sleeping on concrete floors, and he went through hell. And then they kept him on for like 2 months in Germany and treated him like shit. And then they just fired him and said, good luck in Helsinki. They didn't even remember he was from Japan. They thought for some reason he lived in Finland. And they just like sent him back to Japan. And he goes back to his wife, and she's like, well, what was this whole year about? Like, why did you waste your life on this whole thing? And I felt so bad about that. And because I asked him to come, he like literally quit his job and left Japan and came to Switzerland and lived with me on the same floor. So I said, the only thing I really have to offer you is my Ether. So just take it, and maybe it'll be worth $1 one day, and that's a house or a nest egg or something like that. Again, I didn't foresee Ethereum being a successful project. I honestly believed the most likely outcome was that Ethereum was going to collapse, and they nearly did. They raised 18 million, and by the time they launched it, they only had about $500,000 left in treasury. So they were very close to bankruptcy, and there was so much inner fighting. I mean, they fired half the founders within the first year, or they left, and then even Gavin was pushed out of the project. So it was not exactly smooth sailing. And there's already been, I think, 3 books written about the founding of Ethereum, and they're page turners because there was so much drama day in and day out, and so forth. So it's one of those things where they won the lottery, but if you run the experiment 10 times, they would have lost 9 times out of 10. And that Ether probably would have been worth very little. I mean, how much is NXT worth now, or Peercoin worth now, or any of these other things that were floating around? Really not a lot. So would I have done the same thing? Yeah, I would have made the same decision, even knowing what I know now, because I think it was the right thing to do. If, people trust you and they take a leap because of you as a leader, then you have to make sure that they're taken care of on the way out, even if it's not the most amicable way out or whatever. It doesn't matter, because you have to respect them for the time that they were there and the sacrifices that they made. And if it works out, all the better. And you just have a lot of joy because you've given somebody basically something that they ordinarily would have never managed to get in their life. And their success was my success. I've been able to go on and build Cardano, and we raised 72 million in Japan, and it turned into an $11 billion ecosystem. And IOG is going to be around for a long time, and this company continues to innovate and grow, and I'll have a dozen more opportunities and options and capabilities, and I can always write a book and it'll probably be a bestseller. So there's a million different ways to enjoy prosperity, but the key to life in business is spread it around. Take care of people, make sure people are treated fairly and adequately rewarded for their contributions and the time that they spend. And you're not always going to be able to, in the case, for example, with Ethereum, to end on good terms. That was a pretty messy divorce, and the Ethereum community thinks I'm a horrible human being and, the worst guy ever. And you got Vitalik, tweeting sarcastically that there's a world of difference between confidence and competence. I think that was a tweet directed at me. So that's okay. I still learned a lot from the experience, and I wouldn't have been able to build Cardano and create IOHK if not for those experiences that I gained there. So I think that's the ultimate lesson to all of this, and don't have any regrets. Just don't make the same mistakes twice, and make sure you have integrity in everything you do.
I think you're living by the rules of the universe, if you want to call it karma, which is doing the right thing. But the book 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey, adopting the spirit of abundance. And I certainly see that with you. There's enough of the pie to go around.
Yeah,
and if you try
that concept of interdependence, and also habit number 2, start with the end in mind. Number 1, be proactive. All the good things in my life were because I was proactive. I read that book when I was a teenager. It was one of the most profound books. And everybody ignores it now. It's an 80s book. Who cares? Like, no, guys, that's wisdom. That's pure wisdom right there. Sharpen the saw. Yeah. I went to the beach the other day to sharpen the saw and just stood in the ocean and thought about it. You know what? I actually got that book on an audio book, and I put it in my car and uploaded it to the hard drive in my car. And I probably listened to the book probably 12 or 13 times from end to end. What do you do to sharpen the saw? Oh, yeah. There's a very nice overlap between what Covey was talking about and Stoicism as a philosophy. And, you have to endure some pain and suffering every day to really get yourself into that mindset. And asceticism is so important from time to time. You don't have to be in those stalagmites and live on a pillar for 20 years, but there are things you should do to deny. It's like I fast every quarter. I don't eat for a week. Literally, I just drink water, and I don't have any food for a week. And that's great for your health, but more importantly, it's a mental challenge, because you, as a CEO, everyone is offering you food, especially when you're on a fast. I have a rule. I can't go to Italy when I'm on a fast, because they're like, I'm on a fast. Oh, that means no bread. Here you go. No, that's not what a fast means. Okay. You go to like a Muslim country or something when you fast, because at least they get it. They conceptualize, and they're like, okay, we understand what's going on. We won't try to feed you. So I fast. That's an example. Another thing is the Wim Hof training. So cold exposure, these types of things. I'm actually buying an ice bath, and I'm going to start dousing myself for 10 or 15 minutes in ice cold water, and just build cold resistance in these things. And there's a million other things you can do to build resilience and also the capacity to slow yourself down and reset. So isolation tanks are phenomenal for this, where you just kind of float in a tank for an hour in dark and no sound, and some people hallucinate. But what it does is it resets your mind, and it gets you into a flow state where when you exit, you're calm, and then you realize that all the things that were bothering you and eating away at you, they don't matter as much. You can let them flow away, and then you can get to work. Mindfulness meditation is, another example of that. So I'm a big fan of all these things. I try to blend a little bit of the old and the new. So like old meditation with new stuff. Like this is the latest thing I got. It's actually a brain-computer interface, and it's called an Ergonite. And basically how it works is it's got these 4 leads here, and they can read your brain waves. And actually this is the device to help retrain your brain to fall asleep better. One of my problems is I have a lot of insomnia. I drink so much coffee. I'm a CEO of a global company in 40 countries. So every moment of every day, someone's messaging me, and that lack of sleep hygiene, that digital toxicity has created a situation where it's really hard for me at times to sleep. So what this device does is it identifies what brain waves you have when you're in a deep, rich sleep, and it trains you how to produce them on your own. So you can lay on a pillow, produce them, and fall asleep very quickly. It's just a miracle of science that these types of devices exist, and they're backed by peer-reviewed science and so forth. And they have similar devices for meditation. They have neural feedback devices, and you can do just wonders. Like, for example, in the hypnosis community, for over 200 years, they've known how to do something called glove anesthesia. It's the coolest thing, if you ever want to Google it, where you can hypnotize someone to not feel pain.
Did you say glove or gloved?
Glove, like a hand glove. And you can literally hypnotize someone to not feel pain in a limb or their body. And so they've actually used it to perform surgery on people. So they, without anesthetizing a person, hypnotize them, and they can cut into them, remove an organ, or perform something. It's the coolest thing. And you can use auto-hypnosis to do it to yourself, to lose all sensation in a body part if you want to. Or if you have back pain, you can get rid of back pain with it. And so it's really extraordinary what the human mind can do and how much willpower, we really have. And what's so cool is science is just starting to catch up to these fringes. These are things that have been known for a long time, by yogis and by fringe people. No one really took them seriously. And then they started doing brain scans, and they say, oh, well, if you meditate for a long time, your gray matter, it starts, getting much more dense in certain areas. And wow, these guys seem to have different brainwave patterns. I guess the meditation's actually doing something, and it's not all made up metaphysical woo-hooey. And similarly, when you do biofeedback and neural feedback training, it turns out you actually can control your body temperature and slow down your heart rate and make yourself more resilient to cold. Wow, there's real science behind all of this. And it's so cool because what we've done is taken 30 years of techniques that you'd have to master and learn from some weird guy in Tibet. And now we can create training programs where deliberate practice can allow you to learn it in 6 months or a year or something like that. Probably within the next 10 years, BCI will get sufficiently advanced that you can become a master meditator within 1 year instead of 40 years living in a cave somewhere in the mountains. And it's so cool because think about what that does to your ability to perform, your ability to relate. Just mindfulness with empathy is so incredibly profound. There's all these people I've had big historic disagreements with, like Vitalik and Dan Larimer. In certain cases, I think their conduct has been reprehensible. And there's a lot of anger that one can have in all of that. You practice mindfulness meditation and empathy and put yourself in their perspective and think of why they believe and what values they have and so forth. And then suddenly all the anger goes away and all the disagreements go away. And if you see them in person, it's like, oh, okay, let the past die, bury the hatchet, this type of stuff. Hate is like taking poison and hoping the other guy dies. It doesn't work. So it's so exciting that we have these techniques and these things, and all you have to do is have an open mind and embrace it. And I owe so much to podcasts to expose me to these things. I listen to Lex Friedman and Sam Harris and Joe Rogan and so forth, and they bring on these incredible guests like Michael Pollan and all these other guys. And then suddenly you're listening to like this world expert in a very, very bespoke area basically tell you this incredible thing that you would never be exposed to normally. And
absolutely. Matthew Watson is I think it's Matthew Watson, neuroscientist on Joe Rogan, who was speaking about sleep hygiene and the power of sleep. And that changed me forever. One little trick I actually do for sleep myself is I wear these orange goggles at night. So I do a lot of my gym work and baseball training during the evening. But as soon as I'm leaving the gym, I put on these orange glasses that trick my mind to think that it's a sunset around me. I found that to be remarkably effective just by cutting out. I mean, we've heard about blue light before, but just by putting on orange sunglasses, they're actually my shooting glasses, but I put them on, my brain thinks it's a sunset, and it really helps with the sleep.
Yeah, it alters your melatonin production, and you have a circadian rhythm as a result. It's really cool. I actually have a device for that. This uses blue light, and it comes from China. And actually, you put it on about 9 a.m. and you wear it, and apparently the blue light will actually allow you to reset your entire circadian rhythm. Let's see if there's enough battery power to turn it on.
Are there lenses on that thing? I can't.
No. I'll put it over my glasses. Hang on a second. I shall take my glasses off. So there you go. You get the scary cyborg eyes, and you wear it for about 15 minutes. It automatically turns off, and you wear it every day at 9 a.m.-ish or whenever you're about 12 hours away. So if you go to bed at 9 p.m., you wear it at 9 a.m., you go to bed at 10 p.m., et cetera, and it helps actually reset the entire circadian rhythm. They're really great for jet lag. And actually, the technology comes from astronauts because they have no natural rhythm. They're floating around in space. Your notion of day and night is a little wonky there. And so they had to create a way to help create a normalcy for sleep for astronauts. And they use blue light to do that. And it's the same with these glasses. And so I got them when I was traveling so extensively because I was literally traveling 200 days, 250 days a year, always on a plane, always going. And you'd wake up in Colorado, you'd go to bed in Singapore. And that just does so much havoc to your sleep schedule. It'll take you 3 days to kind of get into it. Then you're on a plane again, and you're in Frankfurt. And it just destroys your entire rhythm again. So I got that, and then it lets you reset everything. It's pretty cool tech.
The United States Navy did a study for I think it was for their fast jet pilots launching off carriers. We're talking about life and death here, where these pilots had to be very well rested and ready to go and launch off the deck of a nuclear warship. And one of the biggest dangers was their sleep. So the US Navy spent millions on this sleep research. And if you ever get the chance to read the paper, I got a lot out of it. That basically what they came up with was a way of relaxing for the pilots when they were in their rack, in their bunk on the ship, noting that jets are still taking off. There is some movement. There's a lot of noise on a ship. I did a lot of time on a United States warship many years ago. And the amount of noise on a ship is beyond comprehension, especially on an aircraft carrier. When you have thousands of pounds of aircraft landing on your head per se, it's difficult to sleep. But their studies were very good, and I wouldn't be surprised if they started to adopt that technology that you just showed us there with those glasses. They look Gucci.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. You should definitely send Michael one of the paper. I'll be glad to take a look at it and read it. I always collect these things. People send me so many crazy papers throughout the years, and I read everything from exosome therapies to bringing back the woolly mammoth through cloning and like clever genetic engineering. So it's so cool, the library that you can construct when you live in this digital information age. But yeah, actually our director of cybersecurity at my company, Charles Morgan, he worked on an aircraft carrier as well. He was a nuclear engineer, and he was the guy in the guts of the ship, making sure that the lights stayed on. And then after he got out of the Navy, he became a builder. He constructed aircraft carriers. I think there's only one company that builds them in the United States, and he worked there for a long time. And he kind of got tired of making aircraft carriers, and so he went into information security, and then we kind of poached him. So he's got an interesting background. But he's told me the same thing: is those are very noisy ships. He said the worst are the submarines. Because you're like in this acoustic tube, and everything gets amplified, and then it's quiet and loud at the same time, and it's like so silent, but then everything is loud because it's silent, so that you hear a lot of that. There's always a hum.
There was one good thing that I did like on the ship, though, is that I actually found you've got racks or bunks that go across the ship or along with the ship, and if you get the right one, it kind of rocks you to sleep like a baby. I actually some people it makes them sick, but I actually liked it.
You were on a Nimitz class carrier?
No, I was on non-catapulted. I probably shouldn't say which one I was on, but it was an incredible experience. It's a city, and at night, one thing they do actually is at night they put the whole bows of the ship under red light, and that was very cool. So because some people don't see the day for weeks, so during the day it's all white fluorescent tubes, and during the evening it's red light. Now, part of that is for like light leakage, but the other part of that is to tell everyone, hey, it's nighttime, and the red lights are actually very cool. But in my opinion, I think they should be a little bit more orange. How much, just out of curiosity, how much sleep do you get a night? And on a parallel question, since we're talking about it, how many books would you read in a year?
I read about 40 to 50 books a year. I try to read a book a week is the average. Yeah, it just depends. As a CEO, you tend to be perpetually distracted. So there's all these people like Deep Work. They write books about it, and how you really. When I was doing mathematics, it was entirely possible that I would spend like 9 hours straight thinking about something uninterrupted. Nobody would bother me, and I'd just be like at a chalkboard, and you'd lose track of time. You'd be in flow, so you don't even notice that there's 9 hours or 10 hours that have passed. As a CEO, what happens is you get constant distraction. Everybody's coming at you from every direction. Even during this interview, I've gotten 6 Slack messages, and they come up in the lower right-hand corner, and then, part of your brain, no matter how good you are at focusing, is always like, hey, yeah, I need to sign that contract. Hey, yeah, I need to get back to I need to write that email. Oh, I need to reply to this message, right? So you're taken out of the moment you're not focusing on that moment, and you're kind of there. And I forgot to turn off Slack. The reason I opened it up was I just did an interview before this interview, and I opened up Slack to get the link to this interview, and I forgot to close it when we went in, and then these messages are popping up. So that does hurt your ability in every sense of the word, your reading comprehension, your ability to focus. And I've noticed there's actually been a huge deterioration of that, and I have to struggle to get it back. It's a muscle, and it atrophies very quickly, your ability to do deliberate, deep focus on a particular task. And reading is an example of that. It's very easy to get a shallow understanding of a book, but to actually be a careful, Mortimer Adler style art of reading, how to read a book style thing, where you get a syntopical understanding of the book and how it places in the knowledge graph of all books you've read, and how to build a hierarchy of information from it and find use and utility for it. That's a very involved practice. You have to take notes in a specific way and think in a specific way. It's much easier to just get a shallow understanding and then, remember a couple of bullet points, and then you can know enough to convince people you've read the book. And you're like, oh yeah, Life's 3.0, Max Tegmark. Yeah, here's what that book is about. It's like, okay. But when you're a domain expert, they ask you, what do you really think about that definition or this thing? It's like, well, I don't know. It depends. You get really good at bullshitting.
There's actually a company that has built their their model. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
They have
that's right.
12 minutes, and you can know any book. You can dominate the cocktail party. Come on now, that's The Shallows. That's another book that's been written. It talks about this phenomenon of how social media, these other systems, distract you out of a job. But in terms of sleep, good days I'll get about 6 to 7 hours. In some cases I get 4 to 5, and it just depends. And the problem is Cardano has been a nightmare for this. The ship Shelley was like literally strapping on 100-pound backpack and putting balls and chains on my leg and just going uphill in the cold, and then having somebody repeatedly kick you in the balls, every day about something. I mean, that's literally what Cardano was. It was horrible. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong in terms of getting it to market. And we just had to recover from so many things that if we got hindsight, would have done very differently. So the launching of Shelley was just so hard for everybody in the company. Most of my employees were working 80 to 90-hour weeks as the standard for months. And they didn't work. They didn't take the weekends off. They worked the weekends. We had one guy work 49 days straight. He missed an anniversary and 2 birthdays, and he just had to do it. It was necessary, and we were real sad that we put him through all that. And I felt so bad about it, but he was irreplaceable in his play, and we would have missed shipping dates. And stuff kept coming up. Stuff wouldn't compile. The DevOps side didn't look good. We turned out that a feature that we implemented was implemented wrong. A vendor was late. A protocol had to be changed because we found a security flaw with the way that we implemented it. There were so many of those little things. And so last year was the hardest year. It really was just brutal. And then in terms of sleep, I can't tell you how many times I'd be dragged out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning in just a stupor, having to take a call because there was certain things we had to get done. And the European team was already working, and they needed marching orders. And, I'd had to be there in that meeting and give them instructions, or at least have an opinion on something, or a trade-off, or have to sell something to the community about a delay or something like that. And, it was either let me sleep for a few more hours and they're delayed by 3 hours, or get me out of bed at 3 a.m. to go and get them back to work so they can complete their day. So we did it, and we didn't complain about it. We just, ate our fucking Wheaties and brushed ourselves off and got it done, because that's what we're responsible for. That's what you're supposed to do. That's how you get it done. That's how business is done. And that's ultimately my failure, because I put everybody in that situation for a lack of proper planning and, a lack of structure and trying to do too much too quickly. And, if, again, as a CEO, if I got a do-over, I would do things very differently and be at a much more nuanced pace. And one of the beauties of the last 3 months in particular is we've worked our way out of that crisis mode. So everybody's working less, but we're getting more done, and we're planning better, and we have better cycles. So Shelley was really do or die, and we got that done. And Goguen has been so much easier for us, despite the fact that we're doing just as much work with Goguen. We've done already one hard fork, the Allegra hard fork, easy. Mary is coming in February, easy. And then we'll have another one that comes in Q2 that brings the last of the Goguen stuff in. but it was all very systematic. We have burned down charts. We're doing agile, story points. Everything looks good there. So we've recovered from that, but I still feel horrible about it because I didn't lead well enough, and I got us into a position where the only way to get out was demanding superhuman effort from everybody in the company, myself included, and that's never a good situation to be in.
You can see how great organizations, depending what they are, whether it's building something massive as a corporation or a military that defends a nation, how it extends the families of those people who support that corporation, that military, that organization. You mentioned that guy who worked 49 days and missed 2 anniversaries.
Anniversary and 2 birthdays.
Oh, it's anniversary and 2 birthdays. And that's where they've basically, the family is giving to Cardano. And again, it speaks volume for your leadership because people want to do this. If they don't want to do it, they walk away. I don't want to speak too much about the military, but certainly when I give any speeches to schools or anything about the service of their parents, one thing I always say to the kids is I always say, thank you for letting us take your mum or dad. Thank you for giving me your mum or dad to go on this operation. And you see a lot of the teachers and the parents start to cry because they start to realize, well, I think they just acknowledge or are grateful for the acknowledgement that the sacrifice the families make. And I'm guessing that the families who work for you, the extended families, also support your vision because otherwise there'd just be too much pressure and people walk away.
And rightfully so, because if it's not a vision that's worth following, then you shouldn't sacrifice that much for it. You can't get that time back. If you miss your kid's 9th birthday, they're never going to be 9 again. So that's just something you've missed, and you have to accept that that's part of what happens. It's like that Catcher in the Rye, or what was the story, Cat in the Cradle. I'm going to be like you, Dad. That song is more true than you like to believe.
Yeah.
And you look at your life and you say, man, how many of those did I really miss? And what does this mean for the long term? So you're 100% right. Those sacrifices are incredible, and it's unfortunate we ask that of people, and it's a leadership failure always when you force people, or the organization needs people to measure up and make those sacrifices. And these are things as a leader you have to keep to heart and remember for the rest of your life, and you can't apologize for it. You can't walk it back. You can't give that time back. All you can do is honor the sacrifice by not making the same mistakes twice and making sure that you're in a better structure for the future, and make sure the sacrifices meant something in terms of success. Okay, so make sure that when they look back at it 10 years or 15 years in the future, they say, yeah, that was time well spent because we accomplished the mission. We got it done. It actually resulted in a good outcome for everybody. What's really sad, and unfortunately this is what has broken a lot of the American spirit, we've been at war in the United States for almost 20 years. And we look at the missions we've had these soldiers go on in Afghanistan and Iraq and all throughout the world, and there's no World War II outcome where we defeat Hitler and we all go home to ticker tape parades and we say we won. What did we win? Iraq is a mess. Afghanistan's a mess. So all these people, in some cases, 2 generations. I have a friend, he served in Afghanistan in 2002, and then he went back right before he retired, and his son deployed with him. So like 2 generations of warriors. Imagine that. So that's like a family business now. The war is the family business. And then you say, well, the Taliban is still around. They're probably going to take power again when we leave, because eventually we are going to completely leave, and the government we put in, it's just like the South Vietnamese government. It's just not going to have legitimacy and rule properly. So it's a weariness of all the sacrifices that were made for a mission that ultimately didn't succeed and perhaps had dubious cause behind it, especially in the case of Iraq. That is the greatest leadership failure of all. It's one thing to fail, but have the best of intentions and a just mission. It's another thing to fail and have a broken mission to begin with. And that's why I wake up every day and I always have to ask, for cryptocurrencies, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And I have to be able to point to things in society and say, these things we must fix. Even if we don't fix them, we're going to try. Because a lot of people have put good money into this. They've sacrificed a lot for this. They have time they can't get back. And I don't want to wake up and say that we didn't try and we didn't honor those commitments that we've made to people. And if I can't say that, then we shouldn't be doing this. We should go and do something else, go make video games or something like that, because at least that's fun. and you don't have to demand so much of people in that respect.
Charles, it really is, after speaking to you, so clear to me why people are so loyal to you. When I release a video, and I'm not talking about your staff at the moment, I'm talking about the crypto community. So I'm not the biggest crypto presenter out there on YouTube by any means, and that's why I think I can give a good insight to this, that there is a huge disparity within my subscribers and the amount of viewers I get on a Cardano video. So for example, I was recently in the Middle East, and I was working very hard, but whenever I released a video on Cardano, I'd squeeze it in at night. I'd kind of do a 12-hour day, and something would come out, and I'd talk about Cardano. I'd publish it. No editing, no video. It was just I was literally making these videos on a tablet with crappy software and a crappy microphone, and the views were totally disproportionate in the sense that thousands upon thousands of people would come in and rally the war cry that was Ada and Cardano. And the support that is behind Cardano is evident not just with the the views that I get and the comments that I get, but also the commitment from your people. And this is my vision. I think in the future, I think in my mind, there's no doubt that Cardano has a massive future. I think it's a rule of the universe that when you're trying to do something good and you look after people the right way and you're trying to do something good for the world, and you've got the right technology and backing and structure behind it, the rule of the universe is that it will bubble to the surface and succeed. But I think in the future, once this is all settled down and you try to outsource some of your leadership, which will be almost impossible because it's very difficult to replicate someone like yourself, I actually see you going around and giving leadership talks. I don't know if you're doing many of them at the moment because you're so focused on the Cardano project, but I see a huge market. I've certainly seen it in my career. People will pay millions to hear a leader speak. And I'm not talking about a leader who's got a star on his shoulder, and I'm not talking about a leader who was sort of nominated to be a politician. I'm talking about true leadership. And true leadership is that, in my opinion, is being able to inspire people to go that extra mile, integrity, to do what is needed to be done even when people are not watching. So my request to you is, if you ever, not if, but when you get into one of these leadership promotion seminars, I would be very honored if I could just attend. Happy to pay my ticket. But I'd be very honored to sit in the front row and cheer for
when
you.
I'm spent and done, I'm going to go be living on a ranch up in Wyoming. And I'm going to be growing mushrooms and making video games. And I actually do own a game development company as a little side project. I bought up all the games that I played when I was a kid. I got the IP for them, and I'm going to remake them at some point. So I got a nice catalog that I've been accruing. And that's what I'm going to do. I mean,
young people need you, Charles. Young people need to hear what you've got to say.
But the leadership should live through the protocols. You know, if we've done the right job, we can embed those principles into the protocols, and then by interfacing with them, it creates a common character. The truest and best leaders are the ones you don't know the names of, but you feel the legacies of. That's the thing you have to aspire for, because or else it's a cult of personality around a particular person, and it's borrowed strength. You have to find ways to give people their own strength, and that's the hugest challenge, because it's not easy. And to make that transcend time and inspire people generation after generation after generation, it's not easy at all. And it's something that's been lost in society. All of my peers in my age group, you know, I'm 33, they're all cynical assholes, you know, and they're just bitter, and they hate the world, and they think everything is crap, and everybody's a liar, and everything is jaded. They can't believe in anybody. And they spend every day waking up looking for the hypocrisy. Yeah, well, you might believe that, but you said this one thing 22 years ago, or you did this one thing 31 years ago, or something. You pooped your pants when you were 8, and therefore, argument invalid. And you ask yourself, where does that culture leave? Demanding perfection where there will never be perfection. And the minute you don't find it, you invalidate the entire person. Like the tearing down of statues in my country. University of Virginia was founded by Thomas Jefferson. He's persona non grata. They're not allowed to talk about him anymore because he owned slaves. He's a nuanced guy. He had a nuanced life. He did shitty things. He did great things. The point of statues and leaders is not to venerate them to a point they're gods and flawless. The point is to understand them completely as a person and say, despite their flaws, they rose to greatness when the occasion demanded it. Look at George Washington in his early days. He was not a really good guy. He was very arrogant. He was one of the guys led to the French and Indian War because he couldn't admit that he didn't speak French. And towards the end of his life, he was offered absolute power. He could have become a king. in taking over America. In fact, the Europeans thought for sure that he was. There were letters between King George and these other people of, well, when George Washington declares himself king, which European country is first to declare him? We think the French will honor his kingship. We should wait a little bit until after the Prussians do, or etc. They were having these discussions. And then they would say, well, he hasn't had any kids, and so we think his wife is barren. This is a great political opportunity. Who should we marry him to create a stronger alliance with the Americans? Then he resigns his commission and walks away from absolute power. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to do this democracy thing. And it was like, what is this? This has got to be a trick. It's like some elaborate ruse. What is he doing? What's Washington up to, right? There was no way Washington at age 20 could have made that decision. So he had to live a life to get him to that particular point. And the problem with my generation is they can't accept that. They have to say if he did something wrong at 20, that is who he is at 60, and therefore always bad. So we got to get out of that. And, you can do leadership training. I don't think it works anymore. I don't think the culture is ready for that. You have to build institutions that transcend humanity, because people will attack the humanity. They'll make the thing about the person. They'll say Cardano is Charles, Ethereum is Vitalik, Satoshi is Bitcoin. And that's one of the reasons Satoshi is anonymous and why Bitcoin's been so powerful and effective, because you can't attack a person. The minute you find out who Satoshi is, if they happen to have run over a dog at 14 years old with their bicycle, then suddenly Bitcoin is the dog killing blockchain. But the fact that we don't know it is, there's no target to attack. So the only thing they can attack are the ideas and the principles. And how do you do that when you're a cynical asshole? You can't. It's too powerful. You can't overcome it. So that's my life goal, is how do I build systems that have those properties inculcated into them, embedded into them? And if we can accomplish that somehow, then I think that's so much more powerful, because it's an endless beacon of inspiration for each generation that comes after. And they say, I have to measure up to this standard. Bitcoin got its legitimacy because of Mt. Gox. It collapsed. The core developers had to make a decision. Do we reverse the transaction and reimburse the millions of dollars we personally have in Mt. Gox? Or do we accept that we're going to lose millions of dollars and allow the integrity of the protocol to hold? And guess what they did? They let it ride. They said, we can't change it. I'm sorry. Bitcoin is immutable. We will not reverse the transaction, even though we're on the losing side here. And by making that moment, that decision, they imbued legitimacy into the protocol, the same way that George Washington imbued legitimacy by not becoming a king and resigning his commission and letting the political process take hold, even though the people he was entrusting to the political process were the same Continental Congress that refused to give him blankets during the winter, that refused to pay his soldiers, refused to give them the ammunition that they needed to win fights and so forth. He had to give that same group of bastard politicians a chance to go figure it out when he knew he could actually do a better job himself. And because of that, he created the greatest country on earth. So it's you have to think that way. And I think that's the highest art of leadership, is how do you imbue into a structure your views and principles and values, and create a self-reinforcing feedback loop to keep that structure strong and those traditions strong inside of it long after you're dead. And if you're really good, you'll at least get a century or two out of it. If you're not so good, it doesn't live longer than the founder.
One of the best courses I actually did in my career was actually a course on followership. So, everything's about leadership. One of my degrees is management and a master's of business. It's all about this, management, leadership and structuring organizations. But during my officer training many years ago, I remember one unit was in followership. And it was probably one of the most powerful subjects I ever did, because I think as a society, we've lost the art of followership. And we think followership is being subservient and almost demoralizing and disgusting. And it's not. It creates great things. And two things. First of all, really powerful words, what you said about Bitcoin. Who is Satoshi? Well, there's a shirt that goes around that says, I am Satoshi. And it's a bit of a joke. It's a T-shirt. It says, I am Satoshi.
It's like I am Spartacus, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're all Satoshi because we're all part of it. And it's so powerful, and I think that's why so many people love Bitcoin. It's not just the technology, buy low, sell high. It's not just the decentralized nature. It's that we're all part of it, and there is no one to attack. Robert Kiyosaki, I believe it was Robert, during an interview, he was asked, I think he was asked about Trump, actually. And it's like, what's your opinion on Trump? And he goes, look, we are so focused on the personality of these leaders. He goes, when I go to a dentist, he goes, I want the best dentist who can fix my tooth. He goes, am I concerned about how many wives he's had? Am I concerned about how he prays or does this or does that? And ultimately what he was saying was, the job that I need this man to do is fix my tooth. And if I'm going to go around vetting all my dentists on how many people they've married or what they do on the weekend, I'm actually going to hurt myself, because I'm not going to, in fact, be able to get the best dentist out there who's good with teeth. I'm going to constantly be looking at people's character. Now, certainly in leadership, character comes into it. But when there's certain management positions that you need things to be done, if we're just constantly vetting people on what God they pray to, what clothes they wear, what sexual preference they have, and so forth, we can't really get anything done, because all that comes down to.
But I think there's extents to that. So like Trump has been sued over 3,000 times. And if you look at the nature of lawsuits, it's a consistent pattern where he's screwed people. For example, he'll have a plumber or an electrician go and work on one of his hotels, and then they invoice him, and he just simply doesn't pay it, because he knows that if he drags it out long enough, they'll take a settlement and end up getting less money. Or the Trump University things where he defrauded elderly people and didn't care at all about it. That does matter in my mind, because when you're the president of the United States, it's not about your ability to execute. You're a figurehead. You have 5,000 plus people. You have all these administrative departments and a massive bureaucratic arm of the United States. Your job is to aggregate power and get a mandate from the American people, and then spend that power by delegating it to people you put into power and ideas you put into power. So you have to build trust, and you have to build a relationship, and you have to build a belief with people that you're going to find a way out of it. It's just like any four-star general or admiral or any of these people. They're not on the battlefield. They're so far away from it. But you have to have a moral mandate to lead well, and the soldiers have to believe that at the end of the day, you have their best interest at heart. And the presidency is the most extreme example of that, because at the end of the day, they're in charge of 300 million plus people in the most powerful economy in the world, the most powerful military in the world, literally can make life and death decisions. And if they're misled or manipulated, like George W. Bush was by Cheney and his other guys, then suddenly you're in Iraq. And all those soldiers who have to follow, they're ordered to follow, have to endure the consequences of the mistakes you make as the chief executive. So we all rely on you to be great. And there's a strong argument to make that that's too much power and too much faith and too much trust in a single individual. The reason why we call him the president was that we didn't want to call him a king. And that was the weakest term the founders of America could come up with to describe the leader of America. President actually was just like almost like present at a council or something. It wasn't supposed to convey the awe and power of things. And then what happened is the term and role got redefined, and now president usually means the most powerful guy at the table or gal at the table. And it was never meant to have that kind of power. And if the founders knew that we were going to that role, they would have built a very different executive branch with more checks and balances. Even the Romans, when they had consuls of Rome, they had two of them to keep the consuls in check. So there was checks and balances that come in. And I think there is definitely a very moral component. There's the difference between morality and competence. The dentist, whether he drinks on the weekends and has 6 wives and sets homeless people on fire, for the most extreme example. As long as he's a great dentist, you might have a Hannibal Lecter dentist. As long as he's not going to eat you, he's probably going to do a pretty good job, probably a bright guy. The President of the United States, you're saying, well, this guy has to make a decision of whether to side with an evil multinational company or make a decision to take care of the poorest and weakest amongst us. This person has to make a decision to enrich himself and put himself in a position where he lives well for the rest of time, or his family does, or benefit us, even if he has to take a personal hit and be humble, and his ego has to take a hit. So character tells you everything about where they're going to side there. Look at Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. We had high hopes for them. They enter office, they leave office, and they get 8-figure book deals and $100 million in speaking fees. Now, those people who paid them those book deals and those speaking fees, do you think it was out of altruism in the bottom of their heart and they were so excited just to give this great charismatic figure all this money? No, no, no. Those are the very same people that were taken care of during their time in office. And they made sure to take care of Barack and Bill when they left office. So we look to character to say they're not going to do that. The hope for Trump was that he was the first outsider politician we had in America in our entire history. Every single president we've had, from Washington to Barack Obama, was part of the system in some way. Either they were a general, or they were a senator or a governor. They were somehow connected to the body politique. And then suddenly you have this person, the first time in American history, who seems independent. He's a billionaire, according to him, who comes in and says, I'm so rich and I'm so out there and I'm so divorced from everything. I'm the first time ever you guys get a look at what's behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz. You actually get to see how the whole swamp works. And we, together as outsiders, are going to drain it. And you know what? He could have been that guy. But he had to be prepared to be humble and admit that he was wrong. And he had to be prepared to listen and rise to the occasion. Instead, he empowered his family. He put Ivanka in a prominent role, Jared in a prominent role, some of the least qualified, least competent people to major positions of power. And it was a revolving door. He brings in General Mattis, great general, one of the greatest of all time. He's so brilliant. Oh, overrated. He's terrible, whatever. Rex Tillerson, greatest businessman ever, CEO of ExxonMobil. He knows how to lead. He's going to shake up the State Department. He's a moron and has been washed up. He turned on Mike Pence. 4 years of loyally following him. I follow you, Mr. President. I'll go to hell and back for you. And he won't break the law. So suddenly Mike Pence is a traitor and he's a bad guy. And so what kind of a leader does that? When it's all just self-indulgence, and if you don't play into his fantasies and his desire for power, you stab the people who won't indulge you in the back the minute that they become inconvenient to you. Rudy Giuliani's the latest one. It looks like his legal fees aren't going to be paid. Before that was Michael Cohen, his fixer lawyer. And 74 years of this history, and before him, his father. So it was all a con. And what bothers me the most about it is that I see those crowds like the one in Washington. I see those people, and those are good people at the end of the day. They're the people who got screwed in life. They're the truckers. They're the people working at the 7-Elevens. They're the people who are laid off because of the consequences of globalism. They're the factory workers whose factory went out of business and went to Mexico or to China. And they have really not gotten a fair shake. Maybe they got a divorce and the child court was not so kind to them and their child support payments are way too high. Maybe, a family member died of cancer and they weren't able to pay for that and they have a lot of medical debt and other things that they're dealing with. And they had hope for the first time ever. They didn't think Mitt Romney worked for them. They had hope with Obama. Look at what happened with Occupy Wall Street and the whole Inquisition. Nothing happened. They said, we got screwed with that guy. We got screwed with Bill Clinton. We got screwed with George Bush. They've been lied to their whole adult life. And then suddenly this guy comes in as a complete outsider and he built a relationship with them. And he convinced them to their bones that they were finally going to get power. They were finally going to get a way out of the bad position, and all the people that wronged them, all the evils of their life could somehow be corrected. But like every dictator, fascist or carnival barker, that demagogue that promises these things, he couldn't deliver. So he had to create a scapegoat. The reason why I can't give you the crazy promises I promised you is because of this racial group or this enemy, the Mexicans, the Democrats, the Muslims, the Chinese, this global conspiracy against me. Go listen to QAnon. He'll tell you it all. And it got crazier and crazier and more far-fetched. And his ego was so strong, he couldn't even admit that he lost the election. And he had every financial incentive to admit it. All he had to do was just ride out 2 months and be humble and let Biden take power. And he could have started Trump News Network, absorbed Newsmax, competed with Fox News, made billions of dollars a year, and leveraged the fact that he still had 74 million Republican supporters to put his kids into power. That's all he had to do. Just shut the hell up and let the nation transition and clean up your legacy and then walk away into the sunset and make all this money. But he couldn't do it. Because if he lost the election, it's a rejection of him. And he can never admit he lost. He can never admit he's flawed. He can never admit he's wrong. I know so many people in the intelligence community, some people who do the presidential daily briefing. And I asked them, what is the daily briefing like with Trump? It's like 3 pages long. It's got lots of pictures, and they have to mention his name in every damn paragraph to get his attention. Every normal president, 30, 40 pages long, detailed information, lots of very probing questions, even Bush, lots of questions, followed by, get me more into this. Let's look more into this. An actual concern and care. It was there. It's just, what is about me? Me. That's not a leader. You know, and I think the presidency should be held to an incredibly high standard, because look at the men who had character beforehand. Look at what Lincoln endured. Look at what Washington endured. Look at the sacrifices all these people had to make in the horrible situations that they were put in. Kennedy, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were literally a depth charge or two away from a nuclear war, knowing that and enduring that, going through that, the agony FDR went through, with hundreds of thousands of Americans dead in a world war, trying to figure out how the hell are we going to put the world back together after all of this. Harry Truman, with Oppenheimer and these other people coming into the White House saying, Mr. President, the nuclear bomb is ready. What do we do with it? And he has his generals sitting there and saying, if we invade Japan, 1 million people are going to die. So do we drop a nuclear weapon? Not once, but twice, being prepared for 3rd time for Tokyo until these guys surrender. And then still figuring out how to put the world together afterwards. The Marshall Plan. How do we rebuild nations we were just at war with and sell it? And then the people who didn't occupy the office, who could have occupied the office, but made profound sacrifices and sacrificed their political career for it. MacArthur is a great example of that. Not exactly a humble guy, but he had a horrible decision he had to make in Japan in 1945. The American people didn't get Hitler. We were denied that. So we looked to the Emperor of Japan and we said, well, at least we'll hang him. So everybody expected MacArthur to put this guy on trial and charge him for all the war crimes that they viewed happen. And then he has his generals come to him and say, MacArthur, if we do that, there will not be peace in Japan for a century. There'll be civil war and chaos. We got to let the guy go. Even if you have grievances, we have to let him go. And he says, look, 90%, 91% of the American people want the emperor tried and executed. If I let him go, my political career is over. And at the time, it was Eisenhower or MacArthur, and MacArthur was the favored candidate. Everybody knew that one of the 5-star generals in World War II was going to become president within 10 years. So MacArthur was the favored candidate. All he had to do was do what the American people wanted, and he'd be president in 1948. That's simple. If he wanted it, it's all his. And then he's looking at this decision. Do I take care of my political career and my ambitions, or do I do what's necessary for healing and ending the war and moving on and turning Japan into a strong ally? And he made the decision to turn Japan into a strong ally. That's character. Doing the right thing, even if it hurts you. I have never in my entire life seen anything like Trump so bereft of character. Every moment in his existence where he had an opportunity to show that he was thinking about something other than himself, he couldn't do it. He couldn't rise to the occasion. He couldn't give it to somebody. He couldn't help them out. Any act of charity was always connected to some gain for himself. Look, I'm such a great guy. I created a foundation. Then there was, at the end of the rainbow, his kids were making money, or somebody in his orbit was making money, and so forth. You know, and I couldn't believe when he became president, but I had hope. I had hope that he would have a spiritual awakening and realize that he had a real chance for the first time in a long time in America to actually get the divisions to go away. He could have built an infrastructure program that was bipartisan and rebuilt America's infrastructure. He could have finally done a health care deal that the Republicans and Democrats couldn't, because he was a bipartisan guy. He was a Democrat for so long. None of these things happened. What killed his health care plan? His hatred of John McCain. The whole reason they couldn't even do a health care plan was he's so pissed off John McCain that John McCain's like, I'm just not going to vote for it. I'm dying of brain cancer. Fuck this guy. I don't give a shit about my party. Screw you. Thumbs down. Fuck you, Trump. That was 100% Donald Trump. And then what does he do? Let's all hate John McCain and kill his legacy and try to kick his wife and his daughter out of the Republican Party as retribution for his vote against my agenda. And he has no agenda. What is his health care plan? What is his principle? He has no depth on policy. It's morally bankrupt. Then he turns on Mitch McConnell. I mean, it's like he just no level of depravity this man won't go to. I'm sorry. I'm just drained and angry. The COVID response was the final straw for me. You know, there were so many things. Look at Taiwan. 7 people died in Taiwan. 20 million people live in that country. Hyper urbanized. They had 17 years to prepare it. The U.S. government had been talking about pandemics since George Bush. They had a whole game plan for it. Everybody ignored it. And the very people that could have done something were not put into power. Instead, it was just all politics from the very beginning. The vaccine warp speed was super political. It was super political on the distribution of PPE. It was super political with the governors. We had 50 different pandemic responses. Every one of them crazy. Lockdown in Colorado. I want to go get lunch. I drive up to Wyoming. It takes an hour. How the hell did that stop the spread if the restaurants are open on one side, the other side? Friend who lived in Lake Tahoe. You cross the border of Lake Tahoe from California to Nevada. You literally walk. The restaurant on one side is under a brutal lockdown and no one can even go. On the other side, they're like not even wearing masks. They're just hanging out on the patio. It's literally 100 feet. This is just the craziest national response. And who paid? The American people paid. We printed $6 trillion. All these restaurants went out of business, you know, and all these people just got hopeless and hurt. And that same group of people, he then manipulated to go ahead and get so angry at all of their misfortunes and convince them that the election of the opposing political party is the end of America and we're all going to go and the New World Order's in charge and China's in charge and all of these other things have happened. My God, it was just pathetic. I remember watching his White House press conferences with Fauci and the rest of these guys. We've done a great job. Nobody could have done a great job. We did the best job. The governors are calling me, telling me how great my job is. Look at this quote from this guy. Oh my God, imagine how much solace that would give someone. Yeah, the general just told me he did a great job. Yeah, but we just lost half of our battalion because we were ambushed. No, but the general told me that we did a great job. He just got a call from the president. He said no one would do a better job than that general. Pathetic. It's just pathetic. It was an abdication of leadership and responsibility at a time when we could have actually set politics aside and done things differently. It just didn't happen. And that was the greatest indictment of his legacy and the final nail in the coffin for it. And he will go down in history as one of the worst presidents. Not the worst. Probably Andrew Johnson was just as bad, if not worse, but definitely one of the worst presidents in the 20th and 21st century.
Are you worried or feeling confident about Biden?
I mean, he's got dementia. He's 78 years old. And the guy's clearly in cognitive decline. My grandfather died of Alzheimer's. My grandmother died of dementia. My other grandmother had Lewy body disease. I'm very familiar with the symptoms of dementia and watching them gradually fade. And it's incredibly clear to me that while he has some acumen, he's not operating on a full battery. And the problem is you cannot put a 78-year-old guy showing early onset, showing signs of dementia into the most powerful job in the world where you have to be with it 24 hours a day. I mean, look at Obama. Comes in young, happy black guy, comes out with white hair. I mean, it's like he aged so much in 8 years and he's in great shape. He eats really well. He exercises every day. I don't think Biden is going to survive his term. And even if he does, he's going to be a shell of himself by the time he'll be 83, I think, by the time his term ends. It's crazy. So I don't think Biden himself is capable of doing the job. The good news is he's been a swamp creature for so long that he kind of knows like all these competent people. And it's clear that he's putting into power a lot of people that are kind of self-motivated, you know, and so this administration he's constructing is relatively moderate. And I think that they can get us through kind of like Gerald Ford did the next few years. But what's going to happen is we're going to have a great political reset in 2022 and in 2024. You know, had Trump not done what he did, I would have put every dollar down that the Republicans were going to retake the House and the Congress. Given that he's done what he's done and he's still relevant in the party and it's fractured, we could have Republicans and Whigs. It's just crazy. I don't know what's going to happen in 2022, but I think what probably will occur is the same thing that happened in 1966 with Richard Nixon. So everybody thought Nixon was dead. He lost the governor election in 1962 after he lost the presidential election to Kennedy in 1960. And then in 1964, we had Barry Goldwater run, and the party got decimated. And then the Republicans were kind of in the hinterlands. And what Nixon did is he put the whole party back together in 1966. And as a consequence, it made him relevant again. And then he ran in 68, and he was able to outmaneuver Nelson Rockefeller and George Romney and win the nomination. And Robert Kennedy got shot, so he got to run against a weaker candidate and became president. So I think that there's something similar without the death of a Kennedy is probably going to happen. We're going to see somebody in 2022 put the Republican Party back together, and that person will become the heir apparent in 2024 for the nomination. The Democrats will likely nominate Kamala Harris to run in 2024. I don't think Biden is going to run. And the problem is people are so politically fractured and divided, and the Democrats are just going for blood. I mean, Trump is gone. Why are they impeaching him? It's almost like, I call it the cadaver synod. There was a 9th century trial that the Catholic Church put on to put a former pope on trial. So they exhumed a body, a corpse that was 7 months dead, and they put the corpse on trial in the 9th century. And it's like, what are you doing? I mean, this guy's gone. He's going to be under criminal investigation, dozen-plus lawsuits. He's going to be trying to pay his bills, and there's no way he's going to run in 2024. Let the guy go, and just let off it and focus on the future. So instead of talking about the nomination of Biden's cabinet and how the hell are we going to put America back together, they're talking about impeaching a president, and the Republican Party's not going to remove him. So we'll go through another impeachment trial, and then the Republicans who didn't vote, the media is going to go crazy, and they're going to viciously attack all those Republicans, and it'll just make people angrier and more divided. I thought they wanted unity.
Coming?
It could. It absolutely could, because the civil, look at America in the 1850s and the abolitionist movement and how those disagreements were percolating, and there wasn't an acknowledgement that there was legitimacy to certain arguments. And as a consequence, people got more divided and they got angrier with each other. And the problem is that Trump convinced half of America that the election was stolen. So now they think voting doesn't matter. So they can't express themselves through a democratic process. And now they're being deplatformed by stupid liberals in Silicon Valley. So now they have no place to vent. So their conspiracies are being validated. They think the New World Order is taking over America and deplatforming them and introducing evil things. So now they're being deplatformed. So everything that the Alex Joneses of the world were telling them is going to happen is happening to them. So of course they're going to start going to violence. What other recourse do they have? They can't vote their way out of it. They can't talk their way out of it. They don't trust the other party. And the other party is calling all of them Nazis and white supremacists and evil people. And if they don't fall in line with their political ideology, they're horrible human beings, and they should be deplatformed and isolated. Woke cult has gotten so bad, kids are telling their grandparents, sorry, Grandpa, I can't associate with you anymore. I'm sorry, Dad, I can't talk to you anymore because you're just a Nazi. You voted for Trump. I can never talk to you again. What the hell kind of political philosophy makes people exile their family members? Cults do that. We don't do that to a free society where people are allowed to disagree. So they're doing that. The other side is getting radicalized and angry, and they think violence is their only recourse, and they can't discern fact from fiction anymore, and they've become part of this QAnon cult. So yeah, absolutely, violence is going to happen unless you have a leader talk your country out of it. And lucky for us, in the 1960s and 1970s, we had leaders who were capable of finding a way to pulling us back from the brink, where society was dissolving. It was the same in the 1930s. You had radical communism flowing throughout Russia. You had fascism flowing throughout Europe. We had the Great Depression in America. And a lot of people were saying, maybe this whole democracy republic thing is not the best government. Maybe we should be communists. There were over 1 million members of the American Communist Party. There were over 1 million members of the American Nazi Party in the 1930s. And it was only through great leadership we were able to keep it together and prevent a civil war from happening. So you get close to these things when you recognize the signs and symptoms of it, and you have to diffuse that bomb, and you don't do it by putting people in a corner and calling them Nazis and attacking them and saying half the country is irredeemable and deplorable. You do it with empathy. You do it by apologizing and admitting your own failures and flaws, taking a step back from the brink and saying, guys, we can all agree that if we don't agree, it's all going to come to an end. So let's find a way to find something we can agree to and then build from there. And maybe it's the coronavirus response. We can all agree that maybe if we get out of this pandemic and we get our lives back to normal, that's a good thing for America. So let's just focus on that. Let's put everything else on hold. The woke cult, the racial justice and social justice stuff, and the economic justice, the AOC insanity. Let's put all of that on hold. The Green New Deal on hold and these other things. And let's just do this pandemic thing and get us out of it. And let's just focus on that. Okay? Then once we're out of it, we've built some common ground and we have a common accomplishment that was bipartisan, and America came together. And because we came together on that, it's proof we can come together on other things. And then let's look for the next thing we can come together on. Our infrastructure is crumbling in America. It hasn't been rebuilt in 40 years. Let's go do that and bring America together for that. And then we can all agree our healthcare system is not working. So let's all come together on that. A great leader can do that and can bring people together for these types of things. I don't think Biden has that ability because his brain is gone. And I don't think Harris is a very good VP. So she sure as hell is not going to do that. So somebody has to, in his administration, do it and lead us out of it. I hope to God, for the sake of America, we can find a way to do that. And I have to be optimistic. I really do. Because every time in human history when we've looked at the brink, whether it be during the Cuban Missile Crisis or it be during the 80s when there was a Russian colonel who decided not to launch the nuclear weapons from the software bug, we've found a way to get back from the brink. And I'm not going to be so cynical to think that people can't do that. It's no one's best interest to push us to a civil war.
The world is watching, my friend, because whatever happens in America, it affects the whole world. Certainly with our military alliance between the Australian and US governments. Wherever you go, we follow, and noting that you do have the biggest economy and the biggest military. We eagerly watch what will happen on Thursday with the inauguration.
Yeah.
We hope it's a peaceful transition. We hope we have some type of stability in the world, and I do hope we can unify on whatever it is, whichever project we're looking on, whether it's COVID, infrastructure, world peace, Green New Deal, whatever it is. Just we need to slow down, come together, and drop the hate. We certainly see a rise of those otherwise democratic nations pushing for communism because, as you said, they're fed up with the left and the right, and they're like, well, let's just become one communist nation. And communism, history shows it never works. It never, ever works.
Yeah, there's a lot of graveyards that will agree with you.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for this interview.
Yeah, Charles, great conversation. I certainly didn't expect it to go this long, but I'm very grateful that it did, and I feel I could talk to you for hours. But I've noticed it go dark in the background where you are, and we've been talking about sleep and everything. Just to close off, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Adam Stokes. Check out the links below. And for you, Charles, anything you'd like to plug for the viewers out there just before we close off?
No, if they're still with us, thank you for your patience and this wild journey that we've all been on together. It's been a truly remarkable experience. And I'd just like to close by saying that I think our best days are still ahead of us. And I honestly do believe no matter what the challenge can be, we're humans. We can rise to the occasion. And while we're capable of great evil, we're also capable of great good. And so it costs you nothing to be an optimist. And some people say, well, no, I got to be pessimistic because that's realism. It is what you make of it. And we've been in worse places before. 536 was a pretty nasty year. Look it up. So I think no matter what happens, we'll find a way to get out of it. So thanks you all for listening. And Adam, this was a hell of a lot of fun. Cheers.